Cloud Governance 1.1 Learning Objectives, 24 1.2 Overview, 24 1.3 Cloud Governance Overview, 24 1.4 Cloud Trust, Transparency, and Assurance, 38 1.5 Chapter 1 Knowledge Check, 99 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. 23 Chapter 1, Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 23. Learners will be able to describe cloud governance concepts. 1. Explain cloud trust, transparency, and assurance. 2. Identify cloud governance frameworks and requirements. 3. Discuss cloud risk management and cloud compliance considerations. 4. Distinguish cloud governance tools and uses. 5. 1.2 Overview. This chapter introduces the concept of cloud governance, explains why it is important for an effective security and compliance posture, and describes the relationship between governance and IT security. Cloud use and deployment models are examined, while considering their impact on traditional approaches to governance. This chapter also covers the place of cloud governance in overall corporate governance and introduces the shared responsibility model. Further, this chapter covers cloud trust, transparency, and assurance, a cloud governance framework, and governance requirements that are specific to cloud computing. Examples of cloud risk and approaches to identifying and managing it are included. The sections about cloud governance tools address the roles of policy enforcement, contracts, and security assessments, and provide an overview of audit types that are applicable to the cloud environment. 1.3 Cloud Governance Overview. This section introduces and provides an overview of cloud governance. 1.3.1 What is governance? Ccak defines governance as the process by which an organization ensures that stakeholder needs, conditions, and options are evaluated to achieve balanced, agreed-upon objectives. Governance is based on a framework of policies, procedures, and controls designed to promote transparency and accountability to define standards. Strong governance practices address strategic guidance, risk management and mitigation, compliance monitoring and remediation, budget allocation, and cost controls. IT governance ensures that information-related technologies support and enable organization strategies and objectives. Organizations with mature IT governance practices can measure their results against their business objectives and make ongoing enhancements. For more information on governance standards, see ISO/IEC 38500:2015 Information Technology, Governance of IT for the Organization COVID Registered 2019 ISO/IEC 27014:2013 Information Technology, Security Techniques, Governance of Information Security The Open Group Registered Cloud Computing Governance Framework 24 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 24. Examples of laws and regulations that affect IT governance requirements include Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, GLBA, Sarbanes-Oxley Act, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, HIPAA, General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. 1.3.2 Importance of governance to security. Governance plays a vital role in establishing accountability and providing oversight to ensure the overall security. Ensure the overall security posture of an organization. Governance provides a defined approach to IT security that can be applied consistently across the many IT service delivery models. Governance aligns security goals with business objectives through a risk-based security approach. Most organizations have a complex mix of IT services that are provided in different ways on premises and managed internally or by a third party, and traditional hosting and cloud services delivered by a third party. Governance provides a way for organizations to ensure that they can direct, measure, compare and enforce IT security and compliance consistently across all delivery models. Relationship between governance and IT security. Governance can help organizations identify and measure all types of risk, such as financial, credit, legal, regulatory and reputational risk. These measurements enable the creation and evolution of new and better ways to manage and mitigate risk. Governance has an especially deep relationship to IT and its risk categories, which are usually described as confidentiality, integrity, and availability risk to information, and are grouped under the Information Risk Management title. Figure 1.1. Figure 1.1 Hierarchy of Governance and Information Risk. Governance, Information Risk Management, Information Security, Enterprise Risk Management. Source, Cloud Security Alliance CCSK Training 25 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 25. The importance of governance for IT security. Governance practices are critical for aligning business goals with IT resources and roadmaps, i.e., part of governance is establishing the organization perception of risk and defining its risk appetite. This allows an organization to establish governance policies and business processes that enable it to operate in a deliberate, disciplined manner, and to identify policy breaches and related risk fundamental to any IT security policy. Without proper governance, it is difficult for the security professional to handle risk and implement controls in a way that supports business objectives. Example, startups often choose to work with cloud providers that are less mature but provide good value for money, whereas organizations with established governance policies look to more mature CSPs that make significant investments in security as a core component of the cloud service and, thereby, offer stronger protection for data and other critical assets. 1.3.3 Cloud use models and potential impact on traditional governance models. Cloud computing heavily affects governance, because cloud introduces a new business model, new technologies that require unfamiliar types of controls and processes, and new third parties into the IT ecosystem. Any of those factors might, by themselves, introduce governance changes. The combination of all three requires organizations and their IT functions to realign their model to reflect the new reality. Complexities of cloud governance. Cloud computing can introduce many complexities into the organization governance approach. Although some considerations may vary depending on the specific type of cloud service being deployed, example SaaS, IaaS, or PaaS, the following considerations apply generally to most cloud services. Cloud might impose a loss of direct control over the IT infrastructure, forcing an organization to adopt a new governance framework and process. Cloud services and data may span multiple jurisdictions, forcing customers to comply with more laws and regulations. Visibility and transparency into some cloud services can be challenging. Using cloud solutions does not mean outsourcing the organization accountability of its controls to a third or fourth party. Data ownership rights might not be intuitively clear and need careful examination. Most providers have a standard offering that cannot be customized according to a customer's specific requirements. Cloud providers might demonstrate different levels of maturity and variety of services, licenses and models, which complicates adoption of a one-size-fits-all cloud policy. Cloud services are often built on a chain of providers, which makes scoping of governance activities challenging. Example: a SaaS provider that is running on the infrastructure of an IaaS provider. Cloud uses a shared responsibility model, which requires specific mapping of controls and responsibilities between provider and customer. Hybrid cloud models can complicate governance due to complexities of producing clear boundaries between provider responsibilities and customer responsibilities. In cloud services, customers must rely more on assessment than actual testing. 26 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide, Copyright 2021, Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1, Cloud Governance. Image with the following description. Image for page with label 26. Cloud providers change rapidly, which puts long-term planning and complex policies at risk of no longer being relevant within a very short time. Shared responsibility model and reality. Number 1. The shared responsibility model establishes that an organization and CSP have separate but complementary obligations to ensure that the cloud service operates and remains protected as intended. In reality, this sharing of responsibilities often extends beyond the CSP to agents it uses to deliver the service and other parties such as a cloud platform integrator, or software development companies that create or manage applications running on top of the cloud platform. Impact of cloud service models. Following are the cloud service models and descriptions of their impact on the traditional governance models: infrastructure as a service, IaaS. Similar to traditional data center security and traditional hosting and outsourcing governance frameworks, IaaS can work with minimal adjustments. In IaaS, the customer has a significant share of the responsibilities, and the service tends to be more static than other cloud services, making cloud governance for IaaS an easier task. However, IaaS providers are usually large-scale providers that can be reluctant to customize their offerings, assume new obligations, or significantly change their contractual terms for a specific customer. In building cloud governance programs for IaaS, most of the responsibility lies with the customer, and the sharing of responsibilities between provider and customer is reasonably defined for mature providers. IaaS governance includes achieving technical competency and building usage policies that allow freedom of innovation, yet are balanced against defined organizational limitations. With IaaS, organizations typically limit the number of providers to simplify their operations and better manage their environments. Therefore, it is highly beneficial to create and enforce a central policy across all vendors and all key security domains. Example: business continuity and backup, identity, privileges and access management, logging and monitoring, and compliance. Platform as a service, PaaS. PaaS offers cloud customers the environments and tools to develop, run, and manage their own applications. PaaS is an evolving offering with different capabilities depending on the provider. However, it usually presents thin boundaries between vendor and customer responsibilities, which complicates cloud governance. The governance model for PaaS requires careful consideration of the contractual terms established with each provider to create a harmonized, holistic governance policy to enforce. Since IaaS and PaaS are usually combined, cloud governance recommendations about IaaS are also relevant to PaaS. Further, the adoption of PaaS usually involves a transition to software development and IT operations, i.e., DevOps, practices, which usually leads to different approaches to cloud governance policies. Whether an organization embraces DevOps or not has substantial repercussions for its cloud governance model. When it comes to cloud governance, the most important factors to consider are who is setting the requirements and who is driving the decisions. Is the DevOps team or the infrastructure team taking the lead? Who are the stakeholders involved in the decision-making process? Are organization-wide standards applied, or are there cloud-specific exceptions? What are the trade-offs? Other PaaS governance recommendations that must be considered follow: metrics to measure security achievement of technical competency policies and controls for developers and DevOps. 27 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide, Copyright 2021, Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1, Cloud Governance. Image with the following description. Image for page with label 27. PaaS governance policies should function like guardrails, allow enough freedom to innovate, but make sure that certain security requirements are always met. Software as a service, SaaS. SaaS presents different challenges from IaaS and PaaS, which organizations usually implement in small numbers and are centralized by nature. Typical large-scale organizations can use hundreds of decentralized SaaS applications. It is not uncommon for global organizations to deploy different SaaS providers in different geographical locations. SaaS platforms usually present a wide variety of services to the market with different maturity levels. Providers can range from software giants with unified and mature services to niche providers that may be willing to customize their services for each customer. Therefore, developing a centralized, one-size-fits-all SaaS governance model is challenging. Cloud customers need to consider the natural evolution of the adoption of certain SaaS services. An organization may begin a specific SaaS service journey with limited use. However, the actual scope of usage can grow over time and produce new risk that was not evaluated during the early stages. SaaS is the cloud service model with the least visibility and control into the underlying infrastructure. Customers need to rely more on assessment, contracts, SLAs, service level agreements, and monitoring to provision controls and ensure that the services being provided are working effectively. SaaS governance models should require involvement of the business departments that can best evaluate the real impact of risk for a specific SaaS service. Organizations must apply existing security policies and standards to SaaS applications and adapt to the unique characteristics of each cloud. Because of the variety of SaaS applications, there are also different risk levels. Governance processes, policies and monitoring should address the different risk levels. Other SaaS governance recommendations are: create a cloud version of the contract template and add a cloud-specific delivery agreement with the technical details on security, establish a central cloud register that lists all SaaS applications, and use a cloud governance program should cover all aspects of the various cloud services models, because the boundaries between service models are very thin, and a cloud migration program can include workloads on any given cloud service model, IaaS/PaaS/SaaS. Shared responsibility model and reality. Number 2, textbooks discuss how responsibility shifts from customer to provider with a move from IaaS to SaaS, but, in reality, the borders between IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS are fading fast. With the click of a button, a developer can move from one service model to another, and an employee can purchase a new cloud service outside the traditional procurement function. When auditing large cloud providers, all services cannot be categorized as IaaS or PaaS. Some services are relevant to both. Impact of cloud deployment models. Following are the cloud deployment models and descriptions of their impact on the traditional governance models. Public cloud. Public cloud is the most popular cloud deployment model. Public cloud providers deliver unified standard services for all customers and, therefore, might object to requests to customize the service. This 28 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide, copyright 2021, Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1, Cloud Governance. Image with the following description. Image for page with label 28. Complicates cloud governance, because providers are responsible for governing their own infrastructure, services, and employees. Heavy reliance on customer configurations to public cloud services produces governance challenges initially and over time. The value of public cloud value offering relies on multi-tenancy, which brings further governance challenges, such as segmentation and isolation. Certain actions, such as security scanning and penetration testing, are prohibited or limited, and visibility into the underlying infrastructure is limited or non-existent. These characteristics of the cloud present opportunities for customers to adopt new ways of governance and new models that rely on data provided through vendor risk management, service-level agreements, SLAs, third-party audits, and compliance reports based on laws and regulations. The effectiveness of this new approach is measured by the cloud consumer's ability to mitigate the unique risk that cloud computing introduces. Private clouds can be owned, managed, or hosted by the organization or by a third party. Cloud governance of self-managed private clouds is the closest to traditional IT governance, but it should also address the cloud platform attack vectors, multi-tenancy at the organizational level, and unique cloud capabilities, such as automation. Governance of private clouds managed by third parties is closest to the traditional outsourcing models. Governance challenges include understanding the shared responsibility matrix, setting appropriate SLAs, and building third-party capabilities to monitor for policy violations, malicious insiders, and rogue employees. One of the biggest challenges of private cloud governance is ensuring that the platform and services are kept up to date. Hybrid cloud services typically span two cloud deployment models, private and public. Hybrid clouds can be implemented in several ways that have very few things in common, which complicates establishment of policy guidelines and the shared responsibility model. Hybrid cloud governance challenges include aligning the SLA and shared responsibility model between provider and customer, protecting the internal perimeter, scaling the security configuration, and addressing gaps in cloud skill sets and maturity. Community cloud encompasses a wide range of services that have very little in common. Usually, community cloud involves third-party management and hosting of the cloud service. Many organizations share the platform itself, but it is not fully public, which helps to mitigate the multi-tenancy challenges. Cloud governance challenges include identifying the relevant stakeholders and building the correct shared responsibility model. Relationships among organizations using the same community cloud and anticipated risk from multi-tenancy issues require specific governance attention. 1.3.4 How cloud governance fits into overall corporate governance. Governance and IT governance. Cloud governance is part of the overall corporate governance policy that organizations should implement. As part of an overall risk management strategy, organizations should define the principles of cloud governance, including decision criteria, minimal security requirements, and reporting and monitoring capabilities. Organizational governance policy determines the organization tolerance for risk. IT governance policy identifies the right stakeholders and sets the control framework. Cloud governance relies on those determinations as a baseline for cloud-specific policy. 29 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide, copyright 2021, Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1, Cloud Governance. Image with the following description. Image for page with label 29. Figure 1.2 is an example of mapping between CHAP 2019 principles and cloud governance policy. Foundation of cloud governance. Cloud governance policy reflects the overall risk appetite of the organization. Cloud governance addresses the process of cloud migration, including such things as provider evaluation criteria and security requirements. Figure 1.3 highlights certain decisions to consider when building cloud governance policy. Tip: certain regulations worldwide require board or senior management approval for certain cloud migrations. Example: the Israeli Central Bank regulation requires that cloud policy must be approved by the board of directors of the financial institute. Governance and the shared responsibility matrix. Cloud governance relies on the shared responsibility model to identify the division of responsibilities between the provider and the customer. The result of such a process of responsibility attribution is a control matrix that identifies the associated person or team responsible for implementation. The shared responsibility control matrix is ideally reflected in the instructions of the contract signed with the cloud provider and should be recorded in a document that is agreed on by both the CSP and customer. Figure 1.4 shows the path from governance to risk management. Figure 1.2 mapping of CHAP 2019 principles and cloud governance. CHAP 2019 principles. Cloud governance considerations. Meeting stakeholders needs. Part of cloud governance is identifying the stakeholders for cloud migration and determining who benefits and who is accountable for the risk. Covering the enterprise end-to-end. Cloud governance scope includes cloud activities and identifying the relevant resources in the organization. Applying a single integrated framework. Cloud governance maps a cloud governance standard. Example: CSA Star, Cloud Controls Matrix, CCM, and CSA Enterprise Architecture. Enabling a holistic approach. Cloud governance identifies the enablers for cloud migrations. Example: team members with relevant skill sets. Separating governance from management. Cloud governance sets the objectives of cloud migration and the metrics for monitoring it. Figure 1.3 Cloud governance policy considerations. Cloud governance policy considerations. Types of data processes that are allowed to migrate into the cloud. Laws and regulations and business critically determine the types of data processes permitted. Locations and jurisdictions to maintain data privacy. Laws can complicate cross-border transfers. Terms under which data can migrate. Certain applications can only migrate after formal board approval. Relevant stakeholders. Cloud migration involves many stakeholders, example legal, IT and procurement. Minimal requirements for cloud providers. CSP must align with security industry best practices. Example CSA CCM, ISO 27001 and 27017. Mandatory controls to be implemented. All personal data and confidential information should be encrypted for pseudonymized or anonymized. Monitoring and reporting requirements for customer visibility into the service must be included. 30 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide. Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description. Image for page with label 30. 1.3.5 Types of Accountability / Organizational Models. Section 1.4.7 covers the importance of accountability to the governance process. This section focuses on the organizational roles, stakeholders, and structure that are vital for ensuring proper accountability of cloud operations. The IT Governance Framework, ISO/IEC 38500, provides the following guiding principles for good corporate governance of IT: responsibility, strategy, acquisition, performance, conformance, human behavior, or organization culture. When implementing cloud governance practices, it is important to keep these 6 guiding principles in mind and to establish the following roles: GRC Department responsible for identifying risk and advising on mitigating controls. Legal Department responsible for contract management and specific issues, such as compliance with applicable laws and regulations, to unify and broaden the concepts of cross-border data flows and privacy requirements. Procurement Department responsible for creating requests for proposals / information / quotations, RFPs / RFIs / RFQs, and vendor due diligence, selection, negotiation, and oversight. IT / operations responsible for building the right architecture. Figure 1.4 Path from governance to risk management. Governance risk tolerance. Supplier assessment. Shared responsibility model. Contracts. Risk management. 31 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide. Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description. Image for page with label 31. Because cloud adoption requires the attention and involvement of multiple stakeholders, organizations tend to manage cloud strategy and migration within a cloud committee or cloud center of excellence, CCOE. To set the various responsibilities, a responsible, accountable, consulted and informed RACI matrix is often used to identify the various roles and responsibilities within the cloud adoption process. It is used for clarifying and defining roles and responsibilities in cross-functional or cross-departmental projects and processes. The RACI roles: responsible, those who do the work to complete the task. There is at least one role with a participation type of responsible, although others can be delegated to assist in the work required. Accountable, the one ultimately answerable for the correct and thorough completion of the deliverable or task, the one who ensures the prerequisites of the task are met and delegates the work to those responsible. An accountable must sign off on, approve, the work that those responsible provide. There must be only one accountable specified for each task or deliverable. Consulted, sometimes consultant or counsel, those whose opinions are sought, typically subject matter experts, and with whom there is two-way communication. Informed, also informee, those who are kept up to date on progress, often only on completion of the task or deliverable, and with whom there is just one-way communication. Figure 1.5 is an example of a RACI matrix describing cloud migration roles and responsibilities. 1.3.6 Cloud governance scope and the gaps created by new hybrid technology models. In terms of scope, cloud governance reaches beyond typical security considerations. Following are some other aspects of cloud governance: cost management. Every action on the cloud is charged, and lack of oversight and control in this area can result in increasing costs. Compliance requirements can arise from multiple local and international sources, based on the organization locations, such as laws, regulations, industry guidelines/requirements and business decisions. Resilience. Cloud applications can be resilient, with redundancy capabilities, but they can also prove not to be. Developing, testing and implementing a disaster recovery and business continuity plan that incorporates cloud services requires ongoing time and effort. Portability and interoperability. Portability is the ability to move data and workloads from one cloud provider to another to avoid vendor lock-in. Interoperability is the ability to use customer systems and management tools to interact with multiple cloud services. Both terms present challenges that cloud governance should address. SLA. A service level agreement is a contractual representation to define, measure and monitor the qualitative and quantitative characteristics of the cloud service, example performance and security. Figure 1.5 example cloud migration RACI matrix. GRC Department, Legal Department, Security Team, IT Operations. Setting the provider requirements R/ACCI. Building governance scheme R/ACCI. Cloud vendor assessment AIRR. Building the architecture IIA/RR. Actual cloud migration IICA/R32 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide. Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description. Image for page with label 32. When building a governance policy, an organization should consider all relevant aspects. Tip: the CSA Cloud Octagon model is a framework for cloud adoption that describes the various roles and processes required for cloud adoption in an organization. Becker and Bailey's Cloud Governance Style 11 focuses on the IT governance domains applicable to cloud adoption for an associated product, as follows. Figure 1.61. Process: what is moving to the cloud. 2. Delivery: IT governance domain objectives and deliverables. 3. Deployment: how it will be delivered. 4. Cloud formation: how it will be deployed. 5. ERM: the cloud formation. 6. Control Cloud Governance 1 Becker, J. E. Bailey, A Comparison of IT Governance and Control Frameworks in Cloud Computing, AMSIS 2014 Proceedings, August 2014, https://pdfs.semantic.ch.org/87F4/711D5E562E7E7640CE970B CF960B57C0B02322.pdf. Figure 1.6 Becker and Bailey's Cloud Governance Style Control ERM Cloud Formation Deployment Delivery Process Source, Becker, J. E. Bailey, A Comparison of IT Governance and Control Frameworks in Cloud Computing, AMSIS 2014 Proceedings, August 2014, https://pdfs.semantic.ch.org/87F4/711D5E562E7E7640CE970B CF960B57C0B02322.pdf. Figure 1.6 Becker and Bailey's Cloud Governance Style Control ERM Cloud Formation Deployment Delivery Process Source, Becker, J. E. Bailey, A Comparison of IT Governance and Control Frameworks in Cloud Computing, AMSIS 2014, https://pdfs.semantic.ch.org/87F4/711D5E562E7E7640CE970B CF960B57C0B02322.pdf. Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 33. 1.3.7 Identify all governance stakeholders in an enterprise and third-party players and bodies in addition to the roles identified in section 1.3.5, i.e., IT, GRC, legal and procurement departments. Other internal and external stakeholders play a valuable role in the cloud governance process. Business owners set the business requirements, enterprise architects set the strategy and technical requirements, senior management and board approve governance considerations, hold accountability. Security departments set security requirements and frameworks. Cloud providers manage their end in the shared responsibility model. Cloud integration/implementation brokers responsible for building the cloud infrastructure, for cloud migration and, sometimes, for monitoring the post-migration infrastructure. Software development contractors responsible for building the application that will run on top of the cloud service. Security consultants responsible for setting the security and compliance requirements, approving the solution architecture, and implementing security tools. Auditors responsible for the security review of the cloud platform and application, usually against a predefined agreed-on set of controls and organizational requirements. 1.3.8 Approaches for assessing assurance, quality, and performance of cloud services when implementing or migrating to a cloud service. Customers need assurance that their data is protected from unauthorized access. Their data is collected and processed only according to agreed-on purposes and to applicable laws and regulations. The service is being provided according to the specifications defined in the contract. Disruptions will not affect their ongoing business. Customers implement cloud assurance programs to verify these requirements. One way to describe cloud assurance, the process of providing confidence that a cloud service will perform during its life cycle according to established policies, specifications, declared features, and SLAs, and in compliance with applicable laws and regulations. Cloud assurance is often based on distinct mechanisms, contracts and terms of use, including service level agreements. 1. Provider self-assessment and technical documents, example specifications and due diligence questionnaires. 2. External attestation and certification audit reports, example SOC 2, ISO 27001. 3. First-party risk assessment against a set of controls, sometimes with an independent auditor. 4. Provider reputation. 5. Provider financial stability and market value. 6. Provider cyber insurance. 7. 34 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 34. When contemplating the cloud assurance process, customers need to consider the following: provider maturity and ability to execute, an important factor in the assessment process. Although maturity is an elusive term, it plays an important role in customers' decisions. Mature providers are likely to be more transparent, more experienced, and in a better position to provide assurance. Evaluating provider maturity involves assessing the following: fiscal performance, market share, company size, number of employees and market positioning, board and senior management involvement, supervision and support, transparency with customers, including financial and technical transparency, number of years in the specific market segment, market vision and development roadmap, implementation of a formal process to measure service performance improvement. Provider security includes every aspect of provider development and ongoing operations, encompassing both back-office security, IT security, and the actual cloud service security program. Provider compliance, responsibility for adhering to the requirements of all laws and regulations applicable to the customer. Providers are also responsible for their subcontractors and service providers, and the level of assurance they provide. Further, providers are required to adhere to their own laws and regulations, so customers must verify that there are no conflicts. Provider privacy, responsibility to adhere to applicable privacy laws and regulations, managing restrictions on data processing, storage and transfers. Customers need to verify that provider privacy policies align with their own privacy requirements, including data residency obligations. Provider monitoring, important for detecting changes in providers' policies, governance schemes and ability to execute. Tip: different services from the same provider can have different security features, levels of compliance and certifications. The risk management process should evaluate the specific cloud service features and not just the CSP general security posture. 1.3.9 Cloud Assurance Program Development. Cloud Assurance Program development usually takes place in 3 phases. Figure 1.7. Figure 1.7 3 phases of the Cloud Assurance Program. 35 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Design roles and responsibilities, risk assessment, monitoring, authorization, and other parameters. Develop classification program. CSP requirements. Implement mapping and classification. Risk assessment process. Required controls. Image with the following description, image for page with label 35. Design an assurance program. Identify roles and responsibilities among the relevant stakeholders, including the oversight role, responsible for success of the assurance program, and the program operations role, responsible for the daily operations of the program. Design the risk assessment program for cloud migration. All deployment models, private versus public, service models, IaaS/PaaS/SaaS, and data classification models affect the risk management process. Organizations should list the cloud risks they foresee, and then examine the designated cloud service against those risks to determine risk likelihood, impact, and tolerance. Design the program authorization process by approving new services, addressing unique risk scenarios, approving architecture, designs, controls, and tools, and approving exceptions. Design the monitoring goals and requirements. At this stage, the customer is designing the metrics to measure the success of the cloud deployment and the continuous improvement process. Design the monitoring and feedback process. Monitoring can be periodic, scheduled for a point in time, or continuous and always on. Deciding on the correct monitoring method takes place during the design stage, but it can be changed later. In addition to continuous monitoring, continuous improvement and feedback are essential for the risk-based approach and for the governance process. Develop the assurance program. Develop a data classification program. Good data classification techniques are fundamental for any cloud governance policy, because the actual process of risk management depends on the classification of the data. The higher value of the data, the more effort should go into the risk management program. In the data classification process, consider the data life cycle, including possible changes in data definition. How a certain data set is defined in the current environment may differ from how it might be defined in the future, as a consequence of new laws, regulations, standards, or technologies. For example, the definition of consumer broadened under the California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA, which has an impact on the risk management efforts of organizations affected by the new law. Define requirements for CSP and CSP services. Usually there are sets of different requirements based on the classification of the data. This is also the juncture to elevate the use of international standards and third-party certifications or attestations, e.g., sensitive information will migrate only to providers that obtain third-party evaluation of the effective controls based on SOC 2 requirements. Requirements should be made for both the CSP as a company and its relevant cloud services. Different services, either from the same CSP or multiple CSPs, can demonstrate different security characteristics, so it is important to evaluate each provider service separately. Identify the laws, regulations, and standards that are relevant to different data types. This process depends on variables, such as data classification, example personal data versus business data versus financial data, CSP jurisdiction, example where is the CSP headquartered, where is the data collected, where is it processed, where is it stored, and cloud customer industry sector and jurisdiction. 36 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 36. Implement the assurance program map and classify the data relevant for the migration. The mapping should include roles, such as data owners and stewards, responsible for data governance, usually a business role, administrators, responsible for actions such as backup or monitoring, usually a technical role, and user categories, people or units who actually need different degrees of access to the data and services. Identify the processes, functions and systems relevant to the migration. Data is a major part of the cloud migration, but successful cloud migration also involves identification of the systems that will provide access to the data, and processes and functions that enable data updates, backups, and access controls. Rate cloud application sensitivity, usually how sensitive the application is to confidentiality and integrity threats, and criticality, usually the importance of application availability. GDPR added resilience to the CIA triad, so rating the cloud application ability to function under adverse conditions is part of the resilience factor. Based on the organization cloud strategy, choose the cloud delivery service level, IaaS/PaaS/SaaS, and deployment models, private/public/hybrid/community. Some applications can be accessed as SaaS, and some need to be developed on top of IaaS/PaaS. Some workloads can use public clouds, while some might stay in the private or hybrid zone. Implement security requirements and risk assessment processes. Following analyses of application sensitivity, technical characteristics, and relevant laws and regulations, organizations can start implementing security architecture, mitigating controls, and specific requirements. Example, the UK government adopted a new policy about the security classification of information assets. The new policy narrowed the classification levels from 6 categories to 3, official, secret and top secret. With the implementation of the new classification scheme, the services provided through the G-Cloud framework will fall into the official category. 22 January 3. 10 tools and techniques to design, implement, and operate a governance program to provide assurance. Various tools and techniques are available. The following is a list of tools for use in cloud governance. Contract providers usually require customers to sign a customer agreement before using services. Those agreements are a major foundation of governance and assurance, because they provide controls on the relationship with the CSP. Cloud agreements or contracts usually consist of service terms, slot, acceptable use policy, technical support, and legal terms, jurisdiction, dispute handling, remedies. Those terms are the foundation of the shared responsibility model, which is usually not described directly in the contract. In general, cloud providers rely on unified service and do not negotiate their contracts for every customer request. However, large organizations probably will be able to get more changes, and smaller providers probably will demonstrate more flexibility. See section January 4, 13 for more information about contracts as a governance tool. Security assessment. Assessment of the cloud service and provider security posture is critical when ensuring governance. There are many assessment triggers. It can be a preliminary process before the actual cloud migration or an ongoing process to monitor cloud providers. It can result from corporate policy or from regulatory guidelines. Security assessments range from reviewing papers to actual hands-on red teaming. 2 European Union Agency for Cybersecurity, Security Framework for Governmental Clouds, Annex A and B Case Studies and Interviews, www.nsa.europa.eu/publications/security-framework-for-governmental-clouds/annex-a-b-case-studies-and-interviews/view 37 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 37. Penetration testing on the overhaul platform. In general, the goals of each assessment process are to understand the relevant controls, to check that customer-side controls are in place and operating correctly, and to verify that the customer is asking the cloud provider the right questions about responsibilities under the shared responsibility model. See section January 4, 14 for more information about security assessments as a governance tool. Audit overview. The difference between assessments and audits is that audits usually reflect a much more in-depth process. Audits are based on predefined scopes and focus on key controls that are usually associated with specific risks. Audits require a lot of planning and preparation. At the end of the audit process, findings should be presented and prioritized, based on risks. See section January 4, 15 for more information about audits as a governance tool. Relationship of governance tools to risk. The question of which governance tool to use depends on the following factors. Service model. When selecting SaaS, the contract is almost the only way to ensure the existence of specific controls. When using PaaS or IaaS, most controls are the responsibility of the customer, so using audit overview on the implementation might produce better results. Identity of the provider and the service. Some providers demonstrate better security maturity than others. Customers may decide to rely on contract terms only with providers that have rigid security policies and can demonstrate higher maturity, but they may choose to examine other providers through a thorough audit process. Risk profile. The higher the risk to the customer workloads, the more effort goes into the governance process. When dealing with high-risk workloads, customers might request controls in the contract, carry out a security assessment and continue with ongoing audits. 1.4 Cloud Trust, Transparency, and Assurance. Trust in the cloud is a function of transparency, assurance and accountability. This section discusses these variables. 1.4.1 Defining trust. Trust is often used as a general term covering security and privacy from the provider. Jingwei Huang and David M. Nicole define trust as follows. Trust is a mental state comprising 1. Expectancy. The truster expects a specific behavior from the trustee, such as providing valid information or effectively performing cooperative actions. 2. Belief. The truster believes that the expected behavior occurs, based on the evidence of the trustee's competence, integrity, and goodwill. 3. Willingness to take risk. The truster is willing to take risk for that belief. 33 Huang and Nicole identify two types of trust, based on the truster's expectancy. Trust in performance is trust about what the trustee performs, whereas trust in belief is trust about what the trustee believes. The trustee's performance could be the truth of what the trustee says or the successfulness of what the trustee does. 44 Categories of trust. Trust in cloud computing is divided into the following categories. Figure 1.8 Reputation-based trust. The reputation of an entity is the overall estimation of the public's trust toward it. Generally, many entities in a community trust an entity that has a high reputation. An entity that is required to 33 Huang, J. D. Nicole. Trust mechanisms for cloud computing. Journal of Cloud Computing, April 24, 2013. https://journalofcloudcomputing.springeropen.com/articles/10.2196/2192-113x-2-944 IBID 38 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description. Image for page with label 38. Build trust decisions on. A trustee uses the reputation to compute or approximate the trust level of the trustee. The reputation of cloud affects the selection process of cloud services. Therefore, CSPs aspire to build and preserve a higher reputation. Reputation is classically represented by a broad score reflecting the overall outlook, or a small number of scores on numerous foremost aspects of performance. SLA verification-based trust. In SLA verification-based trust, after establishing preliminary trust and accessing a cloud service, the cloud customer is required to validate and re-examine the trust value. A service-level agreement is a lawful contract between the two communicating parties, customer and provider. Therefore, monitoring the quality of service, QoS, parameters and verifying SLAs are essential steps in trust management for cloud computing. A third CSP party is required to provide these types of services. Policy-based trust. Policy-based trust requires a formal trust construct. In a related area, public key infrastructure, PKI, is a widely used technology that employs formal trust methodologies to support key certification, digital signing and validation. It also supports data attribute certification and validation. In this category, the trust in a certification authority, CA, is dependent on its confirmation with defined policies governing delivery, retention, and validation of public key certificates. Certificate policies play a key role in PKI trust. Evidence-based trust. In evidence-based trust, a truster's belief in a trustee's predictable behavior is based on proof supporting attributes of adeptness, helpfulness, and honesty. Societal trust. Societal trust refers to any individual or organization. In the cloud, each entity must be trusted. 55 To increase trust between all relevant parties to the cloud migration, the cloud governance team must first identify and address the material needs of the stakeholders. Consumer-side business, technology, risk, and control functions need a way to understand and make choices about how data may be used in the cloud, and the consequences and risks associated with those choices. 55 Ritu, S. Ranawab, J. Sushma, Trust Models in Cloud Computing, a Review, International Journal of Wireless and Microwave Technologies, April 2017, www.researchgate.net/publication/3185834944_trust_models_in_cloud_computing_a_review. Figure 1.8 Categories of trust in cloud computing. Reputation-based trust, evidence-based trust, SLA verification-based trust, policy-based trust, societal trust. 39 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description. Image for page with label 39. Providers, integrators, and brokers must ensure that data is treated appropriately, and that they retain control over how it is used. Regulators must understand the legal frameworks that apply, and the ways to hold providers and customers accountable for what happens to data. 1.4.2 How to define trust in the cloud. Trust in the cloud refers to the superset of beliefs and expectations of the three primary stakeholders across the 5 trust categories previously outlined. The trust conferred by an individual organization customer to a specific CSP is based on a range of trust category factors that include its evolving perception of the brand, the level of open source evidence available, media reports, feedback from other customers of the provider, or information from peers in the industry and other practitioners' assertions the CSP makes, and a focused examination of the evidence it offers to back up those assertions. Going further, and assuming an organization customer selects a given CSP, it may subsequently limit its approval to a subset of the CSP services, until certain roadmap items and assurances are achieved. Therefore, cloud governance should facilitate and support the internal stakeholders' journey to conform their beliefs and expectations, which may be based on anecdotal, selective, or biased information, to a more rigorous and formalized process. From this foundation, decision makers can credibly define the levels of trust for different potential use cases, supported by clear transparency and control requirements. The supporting process should result in broadly similar outcomes for the same inputs, so that another organization could follow the same threads of logic and arrive at a broadly similar conclusion, given the same definition of risk appetite, control requirements, and service levels required. Trust can be present when independent parties are engaged to inspect chosen components or services and, based on their assurance work, make statements that reflect the truth of the CSP assertions. Trust works both ways. An organization may need to prove a level of trustworthiness before a CSP will share certain information. Assurance, transparency, and accountability apply equally to both parties. A critical mistake or misplacement of trust can occur when an organization believes its CSP is responsible for all security. In most cases, that is not the situation, and in fact the CSP has documented the need for the organization customer to carry out certain functions and apply certain controls. Ideally, the customer should have a document or RACI model that maps out internal roles and responsibilities. Management needs to clearly demonstrate that there are no gaps between the organization's responsibilities and those of the CSP. The shared responsibility model increases the complexity of the relationship between various actors in the supply chain. For example, a customer is faced with a supply chain comprising 3 actors: a SaaS provider building on top of an IaaS provider, plus a third party that has built a plugin or extension to interface with the SaaS. Figure 1.9. The challenge then becomes about establishing multi-party trust. 4D Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide, copyright 2021, Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1, Cloud Governance. Image with the following description. Image for page with label 40. 1.4.3 Ways to measure cloud trust. There are quantitative and qualitative ways to measure cloud trust. Desktop review examines the documentation the CSP makes available, including security statements, descriptions of controls and assertions by independent third parties that had sufficient access to validate their assertions. Experiential measurement derives from the customer's own experience of the service, example having engaged in a sandbox exercise to experiment with a cloud service. The organization then tries to link the description of the services and the CSP promises with the reality of integrating and testing some of those services. An organization with internal technology experts can write gap lists and shortcomings. In regulated industries, certain circumstances may warrant a direct peer relationship between the cloud customer and the CSP internal experts. This can be a function of the size of the organization customer. The larger it is, the deeper the level of peer relationship needs to be to build and measure the high levels of trust necessary for that organization to hand more workloads to the CSP. Secondary sources relies on professional associations or peers in an industry sector. Often, the source is through consultants or hires who bring new skills in-house and have experience and knowledge gained from prior work with a CSP. Industry analyst reports can help to drive awareness of a CSP beyond trust, but there may be specialist reports analyzing a CSP from technical/procedural/performance perspective. Reported incidents influence trust informally. Example, if a breach occurs and becomes public, the incident itself and the CSP response may affect consumer trust. Supply chain intelligence providers use new ways to respond to questions, enabling customers to achieve a level of understanding and assurance that is foundational for developing trust in a service provider. There are now third-party intelligence services that monitor, score, risk rate, and report on service providers, including CSPs. Some have a service that gathers CSP responses to commonly submitted customer questions into a portal, where prospective customers can review the CSP existing answers and then submit additional questions specific to their needs. These brokers may also carry out operational monitoring of a service for malware reports. And Figure 1.9 Security Posture and Shared Responsibility in the Cloud Supply Chain. Cloud Customer Security Posture. Cloud Service Third Party 41 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide, copyright 2021, Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1, Cloud Governance. Image with the following description. Image for page with label 41. Provide a score, or if there has been a breach, they might submit Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, requests to try to score how well a breach was handled. CSA Star. The CSA Security Trust Assurance and Risk Star initiative enables CSPs to validate their cloud security while offering proof of the controls they have in place to current and future customers. Star helps customers assess which organizations meet the level of assurance they require. Tip: some of these measurement methods scale while others do not. Another point to be aware of is the level of commoditized trust indicators compared to very niche assurance and trust conversations. This is a spectrum. It is also worth noting that highly involved engagements between a CSP and a customer usually carry a high cost. 1.4.4 Impact of the Cloud Shared Responsibility Model on Trust. The shared responsibility model is key to the cloud. It imposes clear responsibilities on the various parties involved, but it is not up to any party to evaluate if others are keeping to their side of the bargain. Section 1.2.5 elaborates further on roles and responsibilities. In terms of transparency within their own organization, business owners need to have a clear line of sight on how the internal IT team has mapped the shared responsibility model across the different control functions within the organization. An organization should define the system boundaries by identifying resources and security controls required for all the cloud services. The compilation of a RACI matrix, establishment of clear accountability and documented procedures to handle well-understood events will provide clear sight and reduce the impact of the shared responsibility model. Leaders can trust that their own people are doing what they are meant to do by having them produce evidence and put measures in place, providing ongoing assurance that the right people are doing the right things at the right time. If any of those controls are not working fully, there needs to be accountability. The organization needs to carry out an appropriate level of discovery for the number of workloads it plans to deploy or services it will consume in the cloud, e.g., how many people are needed to operate the controls so the service is trustworthy. Certain decisions flow from this. Does the organization need to scale up internally by hiring full-time staff or working with external consultants? Within an organization, the responsibilities need to be explicitly stated and reflected in the way the business runs its own operations, to avoid gaps between where its responsibilities end and the CSP responsibilities begin. It may be useful to outline those responsibilities and their exact interpretations in an agreement between both sides. Cloud services change much more rapidly than traditional IT services, with new services released and old services deprecated. The shared responsibility model can evolve over time as the provider adds new services and upgrades existing services. For example, if a CSP decommissions a particular service offering, it is important to understand who is responsible for managing the life cycle of data migration and conversion to the new service. All parties need to consider their respective responsibilities through the life cycle of services, not just at a point in time. A cloud customer may be increasing its risk based on the nature of the cloud service. Non-core services in the cloud can be at risk of being replaced or substantially changed. The dependency chain with core services can give confidence that they will continue for some time to come. Changes to fundamental services carry a much higher cost to all users. 1.4.5 Relationships among transparency, assurance, and accountability. Trust in the cloud is a function of three variables: transparency, assurance, and accountability. It may be helpful to think of these elements as the three legs of a stool. If there is strong transparency but limited accountability and a level of moderate assurance, that will affect how much the customer trusts a CSP. Those three elements are, effectively, in the eye of the beholder. They also work both ways. The organization must know its own Risk 42 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description. Image for page with label 42. Appetite: whether it is subject to any regulations, and what it is prepared to accept, because it is unlikely any CSP can fully deliver on all three criteria. An organization that is subject to contractual or regulatory requirements may not be able to use a service for certain workloads if one of those three elements is weak. Figure 1.10. Following are descriptions of the three variables of trust, transparency. In the absence of providing trusted access to its platform, a CSP can show evidence at a level that permits cloud customers to make reasonable judgments about what the provider does and does not do. The more factors a CSP can demonstrate, e.g., restricted access, encryption, or other controls, the more convincing that it operates transparently. For larger accounts, the level of transparency can evolve during the relationship, as the CSP gains a deeper appreciation of the business possibilities. Assurance: the knowledge that a control is operating as stated can come with different levels of assurance, from a design review to an operational check, to a deep audit and ongoing inspection. It may be linked to frequency, e.g., how often are the controls checked? Is monitoring continuous or does it occur at a point in time? It can be linked to who performs the check, e.g., is it the CSP, the cloud provider assessor, or a totally independent auditor? Assurance is covered in depth in Chapter 6. Tip: some CSPs have monetized assurance by making it a service offering. By subscribing to optional or enhanced programs, the CSP customers get a level of access to security information that is not publicly available to all. This helps them to assign a specific budget number to security. Even customers that do not subscribe may benefit from this rising tide, because the CSP may provide additional security to core services regardless of whether the user pays extra for it. Accountability is the CSP demonstrating a commitment not only to state that it does something, but also to show that it does something. If a service is not operating as stated, accountability is reflected in how the CSP adapts and responds to make amends. Accountability also relates to the risk management and remediation processes that should ensure identified risk is managed appropriately and remediated in a timely manner. Figure 1.10 Relationships among cloud transparency, assurance, accountability, and trust. Assurance, accountability, transparency, trust. 43 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description. Image for page with label 43. (1.4.6) Transparency has considerable importance and attention due to a lack of visibility in cloud services, which is a business risk in terms of security, compliance, and governance. Private organizations and government institutions gain the confidence of the public and customers by being more transparent about their motives, goals, and processes for accessing data. Transparency is hard to define because it means different things in different scenarios. In fiscal economic terms, transparency is defined as governments being open with the public about structures and functions, policy intentions, public sector accounts and projections. In social sciences, transparency connotes the ability of interested parties to see otherwise private information. In information technology, transparency refers to actions aimed at improving openness and accountability. Point 66. This section addresses transparency as the practice of disclosing information related to security practices and controls used to protect customer data and applications hosted in the cloud environment. It entails the provision of synchronous and asynchronous information about events related to data and applications to give sufficient visibility into incidents affecting their assets while in the custody of a CSP. Transparency is a major foundation for creating trust. It is very difficult for a cloud customer to trust cloud providers without full transparency into the provider's security posture, security considerations, and technical capabilities. Categories of transparency include proactive transparency, voluntary. The CSP voluntarily discloses information to users by means of autonomous agents or manual processes. It stems from CSP initiatives to make security information about their offerings available to all without requiring that a request be filed. It can be generated through various methods, such as notifications or reports, including content on websites and portals, benchmarks, and white papers. This disclosure is generally intended to improve customer trust and confidence, to help customers evaluate the basic control environments of a CSP, to demonstrate its certification to meet regulatory or industry requirements, and to help customers address specific questions around general practices. It is not meant to reveal information that could jeopardize a CSP security posture or expose it to harm. For instance, when CSC data fall under restrictions emanating from regulatory or compliance requirements, the choice of a CSP hinges on being satisfied that it is fully compliant. Otherwise, there is the risk of violating regulatory, legal, or other privacy requirements. One of the benefits that accrues from a CSP initiative to proactively disclose information is that all CSCs, including small, large, and medium organizations, get timely access to details without needing to file special requests, which can involve significant commitments. Reactive transparency, necessary. A CSP is expected to respond to a user's specific request. It emerges from a request-response routine in which the CSP must provide additional information to the CSC. Through the request-response regime, a prospective user files a request and receives information from an existing CSP or asks for an incident notification to be sent to the CSC. Generally, the contents of a CSP response must be more than a meager attempt to beat competition from other vendors. They must reflect the actual settings, offerings, or security statuses of the CSC assets, information that indeed increases transparency about how it distinctly addresses individual requirements. The advantage of the request response approach is its ability to enable users to specify their exclusive security requirements and for the CSP to identify suitable controls. However, it arguably has become a traditional practice for CSPs to frequently publish information in the public domain so that future cloud users do not have to file a request, saving time for both the CSP and customers. Contractual transparency, statutory, a CSP is often mandated by law to provide transparency while providing services to CSCs. A valid written agreement may require the CSP to make full disclosure of all 66 Ismail, U.S. Islam, MROGO, EWPI, a framework for security transparency in cloud computing, Future Internet, February 2016, www.researchgate.net/publication/295082455_a_framework_for_security_transparency_in_cloud computing 44 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 44. Essential security services on an individual basis, while refraining from divulging information that could compromise other users' privacy. SLAs are tools that CSPs and CSCs use widely to ensure transparency. They establish a pact for aligning the security requirements requested by a CSC with the security levels offered by a CSP. This law forms the basis for defining responsibilities and the remedies available to customers in case of a contract breach. Fundamental aspects of this law include representation of the contexts shared by the two parties, and how each actor utilizes the contexts in its own operations throughout this law. This law provides comprehensive description and transparent security processes for both the CSP and customer to avoid uncertainty, apprehension, and disputes. Conventional SLAs generally provide clarity on CSP service offers, unambiguous definitions of expectations and obligations on both sides, and the boundaries of liability. A notable limitation to this class of transparency is that essential security properties of a customer may not be captured. Cloud security transparency deployment practices. There are different dimensions to information disclosed through transparency. Some information disclosure supports the CSC in decision making. In some cases, certain disclosures present non-essential information that may create ambivalence. Disclosures fall into two categories, opaque and explicit transparency. Point 77 Most CSPs today invest heavily in creating transparency through use of the following tools. Security policies. A rigid, transparent, wide, and honest security policy is mandatory for CSPs. Security policies are usually built from a collection of different policies, incident management, change control, and patch management, disaster recovery, and so on. Some CSPs may stipulate that the customer must sign a non-disclosure agreement in order to get access to more sensitive parts of those policies. Service level agreement. The CSP's law is an important tool in understanding the availability risks, from the confidentiality, integrity, and availability triad, to the application and data. Self-assessment, third-party assessment, and certification. Many CSPs use a combination of assessments, audits, and certification to provide reliable details about their own security postures and risk management processes. Right to audit. Some providers allow customers to perform their own audits, tests, and scans. This varies from one provider to another, and types of audit can range from limited remote vulnerability scans to comprehensive walk-in audits on site. When customers are allowed to exercise the right to audit is also important. Tip: trust and transparency depend heavily on the detail and accuracy of the information provided by the CSP and its auditors. Experienced customers are likely to reject security policies that pretend the CSP services are flawless and do not address the continuous improvements that any organization must make. 1.4.7 Accountability. Accountability can be formally defined as being the state of accepting allocated responsibilities, explaining and demonstrating compliance to stakeholders, and remedying any failure to act properly. Responsibilities may be derived from law, social norms, agreements, organizational values, and ethical obligations. Accountability is not an absolute, it is only meaningful in the context to which it is applied, i.e. what one is accountable for. Accountability is then associated with specific principles and actions corresponding to that context. Point 88 According to the Cloud Accountability Project, A4 Cloud, the following qualities are the foundations of accountability: transparency, the property of a system, organization, or individual of providing visibility of its governing norms, behavior and compliance of behavior to the norms. 77 IBIT 88 Cloud Accountability Project, A4 Cloud, aspects of accountability, www.cloudaccountability.eu. Content/aspects accountability 45 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 45. Responsiveness, the property of a system, organization, or individual to consider input from external stakeholders and respond to their queries. Responsibility, the property of an organization or individual, in connection with an object, process, or system, of being expected to take action to comply with norms. Remediability, the property of a system, organization, or individual to take corrective action and provide a remedy for any party harmed in case of failure to comply with governing norms. 99 Building cloud accountability is a challenging task because cloud computing involves many stakeholders from inside and outside an organization, and cloud characteristics such as cross-border data transfers and shared responsibility add complexity. Tools such as the RACI table can assist in clarifying accountability. See section 1.3.5 for more information about RACI tables. 1.4.8 Cloud Governance Framework. The requirement to build a cloud governance framework and not reuse an existing IT governance framework comes from the fact that cloud is a new technology model with unique characteristics. This section discusses the cloud governance framework. Risks specific to cloud operations. Among those unique characteristics are increased reliance on third parties, unique automation features, shared resources, data crossing between jurisdictions, self-provisioning of resources, highly connected platforms, and increased use of virtualization. Those characteristics produce new risk, threats, and attack vectors. Following are some examples. Provider administration. CSPs are responsible for securing large parts of the infrastructure and the application. CSPs failing to perform their responsibilities present significant risk. Virtualization risk. Cloud services rely heavily on virtualization. Some virtualization platforms used are mature and well-known, example operating system virtualization, but some are new and less mature from a security aspect, example containers. Attackers keep exploring ways to manipulate virtualization environments to detect vulnerabilities or misconfigurations. Compliance risk: a complex supply chain, data managed by 3 parties, data crossing jurisdictions and shadow IT are cloud characteristics that can lead to breaches of compliance efforts under certain circumstances. See section January 4th, 10 for more information on cloud risk and risk management methodologies. The previously mentioned risk may not be exclusive to cloud computing, but it is very common to it, and it may force cloud customers to deploy a new IT governance model. Cloud-specific security controls framework: cloud computing tends to produce sets of controls that differ from the regular controls that organizations are familiar with from hosting or outsourcing. For example, because cloud computing delivers new business models wrapped in new technologies, it is necessary to implement several types of controls: administrative, contract, SLA, technical, multi-factor authentication, MFA, encryption, and physical, secure data center. A cloud-specific security framework incorporates key controls, including some that are unique to cloud platforms, such as virtualization, security, and automation. 99 IBIT 46 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 46. A cloud-specific controls framework is recommended over traditional security frameworks that need to be mapped to cloud controls, which entails an additional adoption process and the risk of leaving out elements. Cloud-specific security controls frameworks include the following: CSA Cloud Control Matrix, CCM, ISO/IEC 27017:2015 BSIC 5 NIST 800-53 PCI-SSC Cloud Computing Guidelines. See Section 2.6.2 for additional details about these frameworks. Chapter 3 is dedicated to CCM. Shared responsibility model. Within the cloud governance framework, cloud security is based on the shared responsibility model, which describes the sharing of responsibilities between the cloud provider and the cloud customer. Some responsibilities are placed on the provider and some on the customer. The sharing characteristics differ for IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. Figure 1.11. Examples of controls that are usually the responsibility of the cloud provider follow: physical security of the data center, security of the hosts and hypervisor layers, background checks of provider employees, access of provider's employees to customer data. Examples of controls that are usually the cloud customer responsibility follow: customer data interfaces and management plane security, MFA, access controls, external cloud backups. 47 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 47. The cloud governance framework requires an understanding of the shared responsibility model and how to implement it correctly. When analyzing the shared responsibility model, organizations usually need to document the following: what are the relevant controls to be implemented? Organizations usually adopt a controls framework, which can be non-cloud specific, example ISO 27001, or cloud specific, example CSA CCM. Who is responsible for implementing each control? The cloud provider, the customer, or perhaps a third party? Often, the answer is that both the customer and provider are responsible for a specific control. Such cases need a more detailed analysis that breaks the control into lower-level controls. Who is responsible for each cloud customer control within the organizations, how the control is monitored, and which key performance indicators, KPIs, exist to test operational effectiveness. Evidence that the provider is doing its part for each cloud provider control, and a means for customer verification. Analysis of gaps between provider responsibilities and customer responsibilities and plans to narrow those gaps. Examples of KPIs to check operational effectiveness of customer controls: number of vulnerabilities remediated on servers, for IaaS/PaaS, in the SLA time frame, decreasing number of users without MFA, number of servers with data at rest, encryption. Figure 1.11 Cloud customer and provider shared responsibility risk matrix: responsibility on-prem IaaS, PaaS, SaaS, data classification and accountability risk, client and endpoint risk, identity and access risk, application risk, network risk, host risk, infrastructure risk, CSC, CSP source, Microsoft TechNet, shared responsibilities for cloud computing, October 25, 2019, https://gallery.technet.microsoft.com/shared-responsibilities-81D0FF9148 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 48. Examples of ways to verify the operational effectiveness of provider controls include: evidence. For example, cloud customer receiving the results of a vulnerability scan as evidence of performance. Contract: the provider guarantees in a contract that it will undertake weekly patch management. Third party and independent external party audit provides assurance of the existence of controls. Governance framework driven by trust, assurance, transparency, and accountability. When developing cloud governance programs, organizations must rely on 4 foundational pillars: trust, assurance, transparency, and accountability. The 4 concepts are indissolubly entangled. The CSA defines trust as a function of assurance, transparency, and accountability. See section 1.4.5. Trust is a critical factor in cloud computing. Without trust, it is very difficult to gain new customers and maintain the satisfaction of existing customers. Yet trust is elusive and hard to measure. The cloud brought with it the concept of giving up direct control over IT service and security capabilities. While using cloud services, especially public clouds, users must cede direct control over a number of IT, security and privacy-related features to the CSP. Many security services and capabilities such as security scanning, penetration testing and audits might be prohibited by contract. Business continuity and disaster recovery testing are often not permitted. Customer security and privacy policies, including standards and procedures such as hardening, may conflict with the service provider policies. Access to and visibility into key logs and alerts may not be provided. With the cloud, there is no more direct access to and testing of the physical infrastructure. There is no more direct control over the outsourcer. Instead, there is a new form of governance based on indirect flow of information provided through SLAs, third-party audits and reports on compliance with stringent laws and regulations. There is a perception that these issues may affect IT governance and governance in general. However, it is more accurate to observe that they have changed the governance paradigm by introducing a new governance model for cloud service providers, based on 3 key pillars of cloud trust, assurance, transparency, and accountability. The challenge to the effectiveness of this new model is the ability to mitigate the unique risk introduced by cloud computing. To counteract the risks generated by loss of control, governance, and risk management approaches should focus on the sources of information used to analyze and assess the cybersecurity risks. Additional emphasis should be given to the variety and accuracy of SLAs, the evidence supporting results of third-party audits and certifications, the quality and details of logging services, etc. It is of paramount importance to reinforce the role of the internal audit function by establishing an auditor mindset and an accountability culture within the organization. For a governance framework to be effective and efficient, the following should be in place. Assurance: the customer needs confidence that the provider will deliver the functionality promised and offer levels of service that are measurable, based on clearly defined metrics. Transparency: the customer needs reliable information to inform or validate its risk decisions. In the cloud, responsibility for some actions, example implementation of security controls, can be transferred to the CSP. However, the cloud customer is ultimately accountable. Transparency is therefore key to exercising due diligence. The principle of trust but verify applies. Accountability: the customer needs to be able to hold the CSP accountable for its contractual agreements and, when possible, liable for any breaches. 49 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 49. Designing the governance framework for testing the effectiveness of cloud governance policies. One of the most important governance tools is the ability to test the effectiveness of the existing policy, set benchmarks and KPIs for ongoing monitoring, and plan for continuous improvements. A good way to start the cloud governance journey is to begin with a minimal cloud adoption policy and test the first applications migrating to the cloud. With maturity and experience, cloud governance evolves as the organization migrates more services. The initial challenge is to detect the areas where governance can help improve the ongoing process. Different organizations need to govern different aspects of operations. For example, organizations with very dynamic applications might put more effort into cost management, while highly regulated organizations may invest more in security governance. The following subsections provide examples of issues cloud governance should address, along with some examples of KPIs that are relevant for testing effectiveness. Cost management: the complex nature of cloud platform pricing plans, especially in IaaS/PaaS platforms, presents a challenge for ongoing organization operations. Underestimating budgets for new projects, failing to meet budget constraints for existing projects, or making incorrect fund allocations for non-essential or unnecessary cloud services are common pitfalls for cloud adopters. Governance processes should minimize the possibility of those mistakes. Cost management examples follow. Policies: build annual and periodic budget forecasts for each cloud project. Perform periodic cost optimization projects to check the largest expenses and plan how to reduce them. Tag resources according to budget relevance. Be aware of providers introducing new pricing plans and the effect on expenses. Investigate budget breaches and one-time losses. KPIs to test effectiveness: examine forecast versus actual budget gaps, annual cloud spending per project, number of operational mistakes, and resulting monetary losses. Security policy: building security governance processes, adding KPIs, and evaluating and monitoring the effectiveness of governance and compliance processes are among the biggest challenges in cloud computing and the foundations of this certification. The lack of control over infrastructure, along with the dynamic and ever-evolving nature of the cloud, make this an ongoing effort rather than a one-time policy creation. Security examples follow. Policy: security controls checklist, monitoring policy, incident response procedures and patching policy. KPIs to test effectiveness: number of incidents, number of exposed servers, number of critical vulnerabilities found, average time for installing a patch. Cloud agility and aligning to business goals: organizations move to the cloud for multiple reasons. Some need to reduce costs or risk, some are looking for agile development, some are looking for rapid deployment, and some are looking to increase resilience or adopt continuous improvement methodologies, such as DevOps. The common denominator is that all organizations are turning to the cloud for agility and to support business needs. Therefore, they need to build a governance process to 50 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 50. Verify that the current cloud adoption program supports the goals they have set. Cloud agility and aligning to business goals examples follow. Policies: automated testing, continuous improvement, and cloud onboarding policy. KPIs to test effectiveness: number of cloud applications registered, average time to release a new version, and average time for employee onboarding. 1.4.9 Cloud Governance Requirements. This section discusses cloud governance requirements. Scope of enterprise requirements. When designing a cloud governance framework, it is important to set the scope of the organization requirements and plan how to implement them. Because cloud computing influences different stakeholders inside the organization and affects many non-technical aspects, it is important to set the scope so that no area remains ungoverned. A common mistake is to assume that if an organization is adopting a cloud application, the governance scope covers only the cloud application itself. Cloud providers can rely on other providers and subcontractors, so cloud governance should account for those as well. Cloud applications can interact with on-premises components and affect different stakeholders in the organization, so cloud governance is always part of a larger governance framework. This is reflected in the scoping process. In general, cloud governance scope stretches from strategic aspects, i.e., aligning cloud adoption with business goals, to tactics of successful deployments, i.e., provider evaluation criteria, and all the way to details of the ongoing operations, i.e., which control framework to employ. Tip: many organizations know they need appropriate SLAs for availability of cloud applications, but they neglect to put the same requirements on their internet connectivity. This can result in highly available cloud applications that the organization cannot use because of communication line failure. Different governance frameworks deploy different scoping, with the focus on a variety of aspects of cloud adoption. Figure 1.12 offers some examples. Figure 1.12 Comparison of Cloud Governance Models. Standard scope benefits of using this framework for cloud computing. COBIT strategic environmental market credit operational compliance provides a good return on it. Enabled business investments manages it. Related business risk establishes service continuity and availability. Creates agility in responding to changing business requirements. Achieves cost optimization of service delivery. Lowers process costs. Manages business change. Manages product and business innovation. 51 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide. Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description. Image for page with label 51. Operational and security requirements. When building the cloud governance framework, there are two types of requirements that must be met: operational and security. Operational requirements focus more on aligning with business goals and setting and monitoring SLAs. Security requirements focus more on provider evaluation and the controls checklist. Operational and security requirements may overlap at some point. This usually occurs when customers evaluate the requirements for cloud application availability, assessing risk based on the slot, and on backup and disaster recovery (DR) plans. Operational requirements. Following are operational requirements. Define goals for cloud migrations. When a customer plans a move to the cloud, the first thing that needs to be done is to define the goals of the cloud migration. Different stakeholders have different goals from the migration. Figure 1.12 Comparison of Cloud Governance Models, CONT. Standard scope benefits of using this framework for cloud computing. ISO 27001 helps organizations comply with numerous regulatory and legal requirements that relate to the security of information. Establishes the risk management context. Quantitatively or qualitatively assesses, i.e., identifies, analyzes and evaluates relevant information risk, taking into account information assets, threats, existing controls, and vulnerabilities to determine the likelihood of incidents or incident scenarios, and associated predicted business consequences, to determine risk levels. Treats, avoids, and or shares risk appropriately, using risk levels to prioritize it. Keeps stakeholders informed throughout the process. Monitors and reviews risk treatments, obligations, and criteria on an ongoing basis, identifying and responding appropriately to significant changes. ITIL supports procurement and finance. Scales quickly and reduces IT overcapacity. Leverages new technologies. Reduces IT ownership. Business relationship management forms and upholds the cloud service provider and customer business relationship. Demand management helps to understand, anticipate, and influence business demand for services. Calculates demand to allocate the agreed budget within the financial management process. Financial management for IT services provides a cost-effective administration of the assets and resources used in providing IT services. Incorporates charging based on consumption when perusing cost analysis calculation. Service portfolio management describes provider services in terms of business value and needs. Creates a portfolio for all potential external cloud deployment models. IT service management assesses the service provider's offerings, capabilities, and competitors, and current and potential market spaces to develop a strategy to serve customer needs. Source, Richarders, B. A comparison of governance models for cloud computing, Tilburg University, http://arno.uvt.nl/show.cgi $?fit=144875652 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide. Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description. Image for page with label 52. These could be strategic goals, reducing costs, reducing environmental footprint, adding agility, or operational goals, increasing performance or availability. Define the provider evaluation criteria, market share, reputation. The operational requirements include making sure that a provider is mature and well established. This is accomplished by filtering providers based on their business and market status. Some organizations rely on analyst opinions, i.e., Gartner Magic Quadrant. Some simply consider size, income, number of employees, market share, and other business indicators. Define the internal SLA, system uptime, response time, downtime, backup retention. The SLA is the foundation for operational requirements and therefore requires careful review. An internal SLA can be helpful to determine the service level that the different units in the organization expect. Example: the IT department can roll out a database server within 4 hours of a request, and compare them with what a CSP offers. Define specific requirements, backup, monitoring, disaster recovery procedures. In some cases, the provider does not cover all the operational requirements. For example, a CSP may offer internal backup services only, and the organization decision may be that all cloud services will be deployed on a public cloud. It is up to the governance process to set those specific requirements and monitor their successful implementation. Security requirements. Following are security requirements. Define the provider evaluation criteria, provider certification, specific jurisdiction. Cloud customers reduce the risk of immature providers by excluding those that do not meet certain criteria, such as maturity level. In security, this filtering process usually happens by qualifying only providers that can demonstrate certain security baselines or gain certain attestation or certification. Define the controls framework. Using CCM, ISO 27001 or similar, organizations use a controls framework to verify that all relevant controls are in place and used properly. For each cloud migration or cloud application, the cloud customer should define the applicable controls and who is responsible for setting them. Define specific requirements, location of encryption key, security information event management, SIEM, integration. Control frameworks may not have all the details, or cloud customers might require different specifications. As part of the security requirements process, the cloud customer defines specific requirements on top of the controls framework. For example, a personal data encryption key must always be kept in a hardware security module, HSM. When building operational and security requirements, organizations also need to account for the legal and regulatory requirements that might affect those requirements. Tip: the EU regulation for digital service providers and telcos provides a mechanism for incident monitoring and fines for service disruptions. Adhering to this regulation is highly dependent on the availability SLA providers offer. Legal and regulatory requirements. Just like organizations set their security and operational requirements, they also need to set their legal and regulatory requirements. In some cases, the legal requirements may influence the operational requirements. Tip: incident reporting is an example of a legal obligation that may influence this law requirements. In some cases, the only way for the cloud customer to know about an incident is because the provider must report it. Some examples of laws and regulations with incident reporting. EU GDPR has a breach notification obligation. The EU Digital Service Provider Regulation requires incident reporting on service disruptions. 53 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description. Image for page with label 53. The process of setting legal and regulatory requirements involves the following steps. Understand the law and relevant regulations that apply to the organization. This is done once for the entire organization, and it also needs to be done for each cloud migration or cloud workload. Classify data or operations that might require special attention. For example, personal data may be kept in a specific jurisdiction, but applications with high availability requirements need to be deployed in 2 locations. Establish provider contractual negotiation guidelines. Not all cloud providers will negotiate the agreement. 3. And not all the clauses in the agreement are open for discussion. However, negotiation still needs to occur at some level. Example: most organizations negotiate the location of dispute resolution. Set provider evaluation criteria. Certain regulations may affect the provider selection process. Example: the provider must have a specific geographic presence or must attain a particular certification. Understand requirements coming from contractual obligations. For example, a customer contract may state 5. That data will not move to a third party without consent. The result of this process can be pure legal requirements. Example: place of dispute resolution, or operational requirements. Example: the provider must have 2 data centers at 2 remote geographic locations for availability. It is up to the cloud customer team to fuse those requirements into one large requirements matrix. See section 2.6 for more information on legal and regulatory requirements. January 4th, 10 Cloud Risk Management. This section discusses cloud risk management. Why cloud risk management? The rapid growth of cloud adoption and steady increase in global deployments significantly influence traditional technology risk management practices and the role of enterprise risk management, ERM, frameworks and programs. Some of these influences are a function of the CSP service and deployment models. Cloud providers deliver business-related and technology infrastructure services, and the risk associated with each requires identification and analysis throughout the risk management lifecycle. In addition, the number of services continues to grow exponentially, vastly expanding the breadth and scope of coverage required by an ever-increasing number of CSPs. This rapid growth creates a risk due to the pure volume of third-party service providers that require various levels of initial and ongoing monitoring. Examples of cloud risk. This section provides 2 examples of cloud risk. Integration with ERM. A frequent organizational rationale for adopting cloud services is to rapidly implement new services and products designed to achieve core business or organization strategies and objectives. This alters the risk equation to include management and measurement of the opportunity risk associated with cloud success. This requires an organization dimension of the risk management function in the absence of an ERM. In many organizations, cloud risk is directly related to strategic risk, conferring heightened visibility and importance to the entire organization, not just the business or functional owner of the CSP relationship. 54 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description. Image for page with label 54. New inherent risk factors. The cloud with its complexity is also the perfect place for attackers to hide. It is also, unfortunately, an ideal launchpad for attacks, according to a Cloud Security Alliance study. 1010 Although there may be an initial organizational tendency to view cloud governance, policies, and evaluation methods as an extension of historical third-party practices, there are significant differences. Some major considerations include: Figure 1.13 Isolation failure. Cloud computing often uses shared resources and multi-tenancy. There are security mechanisms to separate storage, memory, routing, etc., between different tenants. Failure of isolation mechanisms is considered a risk. Example: due to a hypervisor bug, it is possible to access the RAM of a neighboring cloud computer that belongs to another cloud customer. These types of software vulnerabilities are always a risk that can lead to unpredictable events and outcomes. Interface compromise. Public cloud providers enable their customer management interfaces to be accessed over the public internet. If those interfaces are compromised by unauthorized external parties, the cloud customer's computing and data can also be compromised easily, through capabilities such as remote access and change of cloud security policies. Example: a developer error of hard-coding cloud access credentials into a configuration file and an admin error of creating a public image of an application server can give hackers access to a tenant cloud management interface. These additional software glitches or threats unique to the use of cloud technologies need to be remediated. Incomplete data deletion. When a cloud customer makes a request to delete a cloud resource or data, it might not result in true and complete wiping of the data, because CSPs may have extra copies of data/resources for availability and reliability purposes. Example: due to the high availability goals of a CSP, the command to delete sensitive data may not result in full destruction. Also, due to the customer's limited visibility of the environment, the customer's command to delete the data might be inadequate. These are relevant compliance risk scenarios to consider, together with appropriate preventive or detective controls that the CSP adopts. Shadow IT. Cloud services from an online provider can be acquired and contracted as easily as ordering a book. This ease of acquisition spawned the growth of unmanaged and even unknown CSPs that provide technology resources, computer processing, and data communication and storage, while avoiding internal assessment and due diligence regimens. Point 1111 Example: it is very easy for a non-IT operational department head to subscribe to a SaaS solution in the cloud and start operations without the prior knowledge of the IT department. Once the risk is identified, the customer needs to establish acceptable preventive or detective controls. Cloud supply chain. Another significant difference between non-cloud technology resources and platforms versus cloud is the importance of other cloud platforms or service providers that may be transparent to the customer. Hence, it is up to the customer to use its discovery and risk assessment capabilities to identify the entire supply chain supporting any single cloud service provider. The more complex and extensive the supply chain, the 1010 Cloud Security Alliance, Top Threats to Cloud Computing, Egregious 11, August 6, 2019, https://cloudsecurityalliance.org/artifacts/top-threats-to cloud computing Egregious 11 Demico, R, Shadow IT, Rampant, Pervasive, and Explosive, Cisco Blogs, January 19, 2016, https://blogs.cisco.com/cloud/shadow-it-rampant-pervasive and explosive 55 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 55. Greater the inherent risk that one or more of the individual providers can jeopardize the customer's compliance with relevant regulatory and legal requirements. Cloud configuration risk/opportunities. The very nature of cloud computing, the variation of service and deployment models, the ownership and accountability for all controls without responsibility for all of them presents new and challenging tasks for cloud customers. The abstract nature of operating in a third-party data center requires means of gaining visibility into data and information that are not straightforward or may not be readily available. Much of this information involves data and metadata regarding configuration settings and their management. Understanding risk management. Although cloud computing mitigates some risk, it also creates new technical, operational and compliance risk. Therefore, it is important for cloud customers and CSPs to perform continuous risk management, which requires an understanding of the details and different approaches to risk management implementation. Risk management, definition. The International Organization for Standardization, ISO, defines risk as effect of uncertainty on objectives. 1212. It defines uncertainty as a state, even partial, of deficiency of information related to understanding or knowledge of an event, its consequence, or likelihood. 1313. Risk is the potential for unforeseen loss of something of value. In cybersecurity, the value is often referred to as the asset, which can be the data or the computing capability. Loss of value can initially be confidentiality, integrity, or availability of any data or capability. Later, that loss can damage the organization objectives. In cloud environments, the term value can be the cloud environment itself, the data that are processed and stored in the cloud, and the effect of the data management on the stakeholders and business objectives. 1212 ISO Guide 73:2009, Risk Management, Vocabulary, 2016, www.iso.org/standard/44651.html 1313 IBID Figure 1.13 New Inherent Cloud Risk Factors Incomplete Data Deletion Isolation Failure Supply Chain Risk Cloud Configuration Risk/Opportunities Shadow IT Interface Compromise Bad Actor CSP and CSC 56 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 56. The ISO guide defines risk management as coordinated activities to direct and control an organization with regard to risk. 1414 Like any other emerging technology, cloud computing creates new risk that cloud customers and CSPs should address. Risk management approach. Risk management includes many processes. The European Union Agency for Cybersecurity, ENISA, groups those processes into 3 main domains and 2 supporting domains as shown in Figure 1.14. Strategy/scope and framework. ENISA recommends 4 important steps to create a sound strategy, scope, and framework for risk management. 1414 IBID Figure 1.14 ENISA Risk Management Process Interface to other operational and product processes. Monitor and review, plans, events, quality, corporate risk management strategy. Definition of scope and framework for the management of risk. Definition of external environment. Definition of internal environment. Generation of risk management context. Formulation of risk criteria. Risk assessment. Identification of risk. Analysis of relevant risk. Evaluation of risk. Risk treatment. Identification of options. Development of action plan. Approval of action plan. Implementation of action plan. Identification of residual risk. Risk communication. Risk awareness. Consulting. Risk acceptance. Source, ENISA, risk management process, www.enisa.europa.eu/topics/threat-risk-management/risk-management/current risk/risk management inventory/RM process/RM process. 57 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 57. Definition of internal environment. The details of the internal environment, internal stakeholders, existing risk, organizational structure and culture, important assets, goals and objectives, and existing strategies help build and understanding the internal environment, which is used to select and customize the right risk management approach. Example, organizations in the healthcare industry operate in environments with the inherent risk associated with safeguarding protected healthcare data. 5. Their environments need appropriate mechanisms to identify, classify, and protect all such data to ensure regulatory compliance. Generating the risk management context. The business case of risk management provides a balance between costs, benefits, and opportunities. Example, enterprise risk management is a cost of doing business when adopting cloud computing. It must apply to all applications, systems, data being processed, stored, and communicated, and to all personnel who have access to such systems and data stores. The resulting risk management program should be designed to meet and not exceed the risk appetite of the organization. Formulation of risk criteria. As the risk register, the list of all the risks and their relative importance, grows, it is important to have a fixed risk formulation and criteria to calculate each risk's priority. During this step, risk should be assessed using criteria, such as likelihood, i.e., chance, usually a percentage that the risk will become reality, or impact, the measure, often in currency, of the possible effect of the risk becoming a reality. Example, regardless of the organization size, it should consider each risk for probability of occurrence and potential impact. The totality of all mathematical results should not exceed the organization risk appetite. The challenge in most organization scenarios is quantifying both probability and impact. Communication, awareness, and consulting risk management can be successful only if it is embedded in the organization and is clearly communicated to all stakeholders. Example, communication and operation of the risk management program must be built into the fabric of the organization to maximize effectiveness. For adopting new and emerging technologies, such as cloud computing, extra efforts are required to create pervasive awareness and training programs throughout the organization. Risk assessment. Risk assessment is the process used to identify and evaluate risk and its potential effect within the risk management domain, which includes sub-processes relevant to discovering and determining, understanding, prioritizing, and documenting the risk. Every cloud offering and use case is subject to risk, and risk assessment focuses on identifying, analyzing, and evaluating risk to treat them appropriately. Identification of risk. The first step in risk assessment is to identify the specific risk. Risk identification is the process of determining risk conditions that could potentially delay implementation of the cloud solution or prevent it from achieving its objectives. The two main questions to ask when identifying risk: what can happen, and why can it happen? This step can also include identification of the risk owner. In cloud environments, the risk owner can be any group within the cloud customer, CSP, or other party in the cloud supply chain. 58 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Definition of external environment. The external environment typically includes the market of reference, the competition, and other external stakeholders, including political, socio-economic, financial, legal, and regulatory environments. Example: organizations working in a country with frequent changes of government might be subject to changing of relevant laws and regulation, which might affect, both directly and indirectly, the business. Example: new antitrust laws, new privacy laws, etc. Image with the following description. Image for page with label 58. Example: an organization is using a cloud-based SaaS customer relationship management (CRM) software application. Besides generic CRM data, the organization is also storing top-secret customer information within that solution. The identified risk can be that top-secret data can be disclosed to unauthorized parties. The risk owner is the owner of the top-secret data. This is the inherent risk, so the organization needs to consider the controls that are in place. Example: encryption. Analysis of relevant risk. Risk analysis is the phase in which level of risk and its nature are assessed and understood. Cybersecurity-related risk consists of three components: actor, threat, and vulnerability. A threat actor is an entity, individual, group, organizations, or state that seeks to exploit the organization dependence on cyber resources. Threat is a possible danger that can harm the data or capability. Threats can be human or digital in nature. Vulnerability is a weakness in a process or system that can be exploited by a threat. Vulnerabilities are usually internal or inherited by the target and caused by a missing component or capability. After defining the main components, actor, threat, and vulnerability, the next step is defining the potential for loss, damage, or destruction of an asset due to a threat exploiting a vulnerability. Analysis is the process of breaking down the risk into its components and identifying applicable controls. Example: security precautions. See Chapter 4 for more information on factors, threats, and vulnerabilities. Example: in the previous scenario, there is a risk that the top-secret data in the CRM tool can be exposed to unauthorized parties, internal or external. This possibility requires the risk assessment process to appropriately reduce the risk. Evaluation of relevant risk. Organizations need to prioritize risk, so they can use limited resources to treat them optimally. The risk priority, i.e., score, is often calculated as a function of its impact, potential damage, and its likelihood, probability of becoming a reality. Based on the risk assessment methodology that an organization uses, the processes may include some other attributes of the risk. Example: continuing with the previous scenario, the impact of unauthorized disclosure of top-secret data in SaaS CRM applications is high, and its likelihood of occurrence is also high, so the organization records this risk in the risk register with the relevant priority. This drives the amount of remediation attention it receives and required communication to stakeholders. Risk treatment. After risk conditions are assessed, it is time to treat them. There are 4 different methods for the risk treatment domain: risk avoidance, risk reduction or mitigation, risk transfer, and risk acceptance. The risk treatment process includes identification of options based on the risk components, i.e., threats and vulnerabilities, and the asset in question. Find relevant options to treat the risk. 59 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description. Image for page with label 59. Development of action plan based on the identified options. Select and group, if required, different options into an action plan. Approval of action plan. The risk owners review and approve the action plan. Implementation of action plan. Implementation of the action plan may be instantaneous or require a long-term project to perform changes. Identification of residual risk. Identify risk after the action plan is implemented. Risk avoidance. Risk avoidance is the elimination of threats, activities, and vulnerabilities that can cause a risk. Example: the risk owner can decide to move the top-secret data to a more secure application to avoid the risk. This also requires validation that the more secure application meets expected control capabilities in both design and operation. Risk reduction. Risk reduction is the process of finding ways to take on less risk, including avoiding execution of related activities. Example: continue using the CRM but do not process top-secret data in that SaaS solution. This option requires confirmation that the data that remains in the CRM do not pose a risk that exceeds the organization risk appetite. Risk mitigation. Risk mitigation is reducing the likelihood or the consequences, damage, of the risk. This is done by taking countermeasures to reduce the level of the risk. Example: improve the SaaS solution to include two-factor authentication by requiring that MFA codes be sent to a trusted mobile device after successful username and password entry. This additional control has to be validated for its ability to lower the total data risk to within the organization risk appetite. Risk transfer. Risk transfer is a strategy of dealing with risk by transferring it to another person or entity, such as an insurance agency. With proper contracts, moving to the cloud can also be a risk transfer method. The shared responsibility model of the cloud transfers some risk to the CSP. Risk transfer techniques need careful consideration before being accepted as an option. For example, using insurance as a risk transfer requires an assessment by the insurance company as a basis for setting the premiums. Any losses require filing a claim, which the insurer will not pay unless the insured complied with all the terms and conditions of the policy. Moreover, the benefit is only financial. The organization can still be liable for regulatory fines and penalties and derivative lawsuits, and suffer the reputational risk associated with the event. Example: risk owners can get an insurance policy against cybersecurity risk. It should be recognized that the purchasing of insurance is not a panacea for risk reduction. Cyber coverage typically requires a review and examination of risk and controls by the insurance company. If it provides coverage, the premiums it charges reflect the perceived quality of the control systems. In the event of a claim, any type of customer failure or negligence may obviate the claim. Moreover, even if the claim is paid, the organization still bears the brunt of reputational risk, exposure to regulatory fines and penalties, and shareholder or other stakeholder lawsuits. 60 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 60. Risk acceptance. Unless the risk is avoided completely and the risk cannot be eliminated after all other selected risk treatment methods are implemented, there is residual risk. The risk owner has two options to deal with this: either select one or more additional risk treatment methods, usually when the residual risk level is higher than the risk acceptance criteria, or accept the residual risk, applicable when the residual risk level is lower than the risk acceptance criteria. Once accepted, the risk owner agrees to live with the risk and face the residual consequences if the risk becomes a reality, despite the reduced likelihood. A risk acceptance decision is often triggered when the resources required to establish and operate a suitable control to mitigate the remaining risk are greater than the potential damage caused by the risk itself. Any mature enterprise risk program requires the accumulation and quantification of all accepted risk. This is an important number to manage and understand, to estimate the total exposure the organization may face based upon the nature of an organization-wide loss. Example, having an insurance policy against cybersecurity risk may not cover all the remaining risk against reputation loss after an incident. Yet management may decide to accept this residual risk. There are other factors to consider. 1. Typically, a single business executive has to take ownership of the risk acceptance, but once monetized, the executive may not be willing to do so. And 2. In mature risk management programs, all accepted risk is combined and totaled for a consolidated view of impacts. If more than one accepted risk condition can occur at the same time, acceptance may not be an appropriate decision. Monitor/metrics and review. Risk management is a cyclically executed process that involves a set of coordinated activities for overseeing and controlling risk. Monitor and review include monitoring the risk and security controls in the cloud solution, assessing their effectiveness, documenting changes, and reporting risk levels and security states to the stakeholders. Example, due to the unique nature of the risk emanating from cloud computing and the rates of change introduced by the supporting technologies and infrastructure, the monitoring of key risk controls and processes may warrant a need to be continuous. This increases costs, reduces discovery and remediation time, and requires the creation of relevant metrics and metadata. This becomes one of the most critical components of an effective ERM. Cloud Risk Management Best Practices. This section presents best practices for risk management. Risk frameworks. It is possible to adapt and use legacy frameworks for cloud services. Following are some well-known standards and their scope and approach to risk management. NIST 800-30. The U.S. Department of Commerce, National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, published its Guide for Conducting Risk Assessments, NIST 800-30, initially in 2002. The guidelines include a detailed taxonomy on risk and a definition of the risk management process. 1515 ISO/IEC 27005:2018 developed by the International Organization for Standardization, ISO, and the International Electrotechnical Commission, IEC. The document supports the general concepts specified in 1515 National Institute of Standards and Technology, Guide for Conducting Risk Assessments, September 2012, https://nbl_pubs.nist.gov/nistpubs/legacy/sp/nist special publication 800-30R1.pdf. 61 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 61. ISO/IEC 27001 and is designed to assist the satisfactory implementation of information security based on a risk management approach. 1616 FAIR. The factor analysis of information risk. FAIR trademark. Quantitative risk analysis model defines the necessary building blocks for implementing effective cyber risk management programs. 1717 Octave developed by Carnegie Mellon University Software Engineering Institute. The operationally critical threat, asset, and vulnerability evaluation, Octave, is a framework for identifying and managing information security risk. 1818 EBIOS Risk Manager, EBIOS RM, is the method for assessing and treating digital risk published by the National Cybersecurity Agency of France, ANSSI, with the support of Club EBIOS. It provides a toolbox that can be adapted, its use varying according to the objective of the project. EBIOS Risk Manager is compatible with the reference standards in effect, in terms of both risk management and cybersecurity. 1919 Octagon. The Cloud Octagon model by CSA makes it easier for organizations to identify, represent, and assess risk in the context of their cloud implementation across multiple actors: legal, information risk management, operational risk management, compliance, architecture, procurement, privacy office, development teams, and security. 2020 Additional frameworks / standards to guide cloud risk management. Although they are not risk management frameworks, the following documents provide invaluable risk and control guidance. Cloud Controls Matrix, CCM. The Cloud Security Alliance created CCM to provide fundamental security principles to guide cloud vendors and to assist prospective cloud customers in assessing the overall security risk of a cloud provider. While CCM provides a controls framework in 13 domains, it also cross-references the controls to other industry-accepted security standards, regulations, and controls frameworks, such as ISO 27001/27002, ISACA COBIT, PCI, NIST, Jericho Forum, and NERC-CIP. Consensus Assessments Initiative Questionnaire, CAIQ. CAIQ is based on CCM. It provides a set of yes/no questions a cloud customer and cloud auditor may wish to ask of a CSP to ascertain its compliance with the Cloud Controls Matrix. Although CAIQ is not a suitable tool for risk analysis, it provides a clear and simple approach for assessment and auditing purposes. Top Threats Deep Dive. The Cloud Security Alliance created the Top Threats Deep Dive case study to consolidate and better understand all facets of security analysis by using 9 anecdotes cited in the top threats for its foundation. Each of the 9 examples are presented in the form of a reference chart and a detailed narrative. 2121 NIST CSF. The NIST Framework for Improving Critical Infrastructure Cybersecurity, NIST Cybersecurity Framework, or CSF, was originally published in 2014. 2222 ISO, ISO/IEC 27005:2018 Information Technology, Security Techniques, Information Security Risk Management, July 2018, www.iso.org/standard/75281 1.html 1717 Fair Institute, Fair Risk Management, www.fairinstitute.org/fair-risk- Management 1818 Alberts, C. S. Barons, R. Pethia, W. Wilson, Operationally Critical Threat, Asset, and Vulnerability Evaluation, Octave, Framework, version 1.0, Carnegie Mellon University Software Engineering Institute, September 1999, https://resources.sei.cmu.edu/library/asset-view.cfm, ACIDID equals 134731919 ONSI, EBIOS Risk Manager, The Method, November 2019, www.ssi.gov.fr/uploads/2019/11/ONSI Guide EBIOS_risk_manager and v1.0.pdf 2020 Cloud Security Alliance, Cloud Octagon Model. June 24, 2019, https://cloudsecurityalliance.org/artifacts/cloud-octagon-model 2121 Cloud Security Alliance, Top Threats to Cloud Computing, Deep Dive, August 8, 2018, https://cloudsecurityalliance.org/artifacts/top-threats-to-cloud computing Deep Dive /2222 National Institute of Standards and Technology, Cybersecurity Framework, www.nist.gov/cyberframework 62 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and ISACA. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 62. Assessing the cloud supply chain risk. If the CSP outsources parts of its infrastructure, operations, or maintenance, these third parties may not satisfy or support the requirements that the CSP is contracted to provide to cloud customers. An organization needs to evaluate how the CSP enforces compliance and check if the CSP flows its own requirements down to third parties. Having regular discussions with the CSPs on supply chain contractual requirements and activities through risk/KPI reports helps to identify risks that need mitigation. If the requirements are not being levied on the supply chain, then the threat to the customer increases. This threat increases as an organization uses more CSP services, and it is dependent on individual CSPs and their supply chain policies. Shared responsibility model and cloud risk. Apart from some customers self-hosting in the cloud, cloud use includes some form of supply chain relationship. Depending on the cloud model used, example IaaS or SaaS, the ownership and operation of the layers change. However, overall risk still exists, and the cloud customer should manage it. Figure 1.15 shows the shared responsibility model and cloud risk. The CSP owns and is accountable for some risk in the cloud. Being the data owner, the cloud customer is ultimately accountable for all the risk throughout the stack, regardless of the cloud model it uses. Even if third parties are responsible for some tasks, cloud customers are still accountable. Figure 1.15 Cloud customer and provider shared responsibility risk matrix. Responsibility on-prem IaaS PaaS SaaS data classification and accountability risk client and endpoint risk identity and access risk application risk network risk host risk infrastructure risk CSP source, Microsoft TechNet, shared responsibilities for cloud computing, October 25, 2019, https://gallery.technet.microsoft.com/shared-responsibilities-81D0FF9163 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021. Cloud Security Alliance and ISACA. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 63. January 4, 11 Cloud Compliance. This section introduces cloud compliance and provides an overview. Introduction to compliance. In general, compliance means conforming to an order, rule, or request, such as a specification, policy, standard, contract, or law. In the context of cloud security, compliance refers to conforming to security-related requirements set by an organization, policy, standard, controls, or regulatory requirements to protect business objectives and infrastructures. Examples: performance specifications, which define the minimum number of transactions performed per minute; security policy, which requires two-factor authentication to access customer data; PCI DSS standard, which requires that credit card information be stored with encryption; customer contract, which orders wiping of the data after processing; privacy law, which prohibits sensitive data from leaving a jurisdiction area; in legacy IT, the organization has the sole ownership of those compliance requirements. The accountability, identification, planning, execution, reporting and assurance of those requirements belong to the organization, and it cannot delegate them. However, the organization can transfer risk to a responsible third party, consulting and informing others as required. How cloud impacts and changes compliance. The International Organization for Standardization, ISO, Compliance Management System Guidance Document 2323 defines compliance as an outcome of an organization meeting its obligations. Compliance is made sustainable by embedding it in the culture of the organization and in the behavior and attitude of people working for it. Compliance is usually measured once per year in the context of a SOC 2 Type 2 audit. Every day, the IaaS/PaaS compliance dashboards present compliance data to the team, example risk, or compliance team, or management. In an audit, compliance of controls are tested over a longer period. Compliance in the cloud should be considered from the perspectives of the CSP and the cloud customer, as follows. The customer is ultimately responsible for all its compliance requirements. In addition, the customer must be sure that any cloud usage does not jeopardize the organization's compliance efforts. The CSP is responsible for its own compliance requirements. A CSP also supports the customer by providing compliance details and any compliance certifications for the related service. This approach, i.e., compliance inheritance, helps the customer to include cloud services in its own compliance efforts. CSP as a customer. A CSP may not be the sole provider of a cloud service. It can be part of multi-level supply chain structure that includes other, cloud services. The CSP can be a provider and a customer at the same time, which can result in multi-level compliance inheritance. Example, a well-known SaaS video on-demand provider, Netflix, uses another PaaS and IaaS cloud provider, Amazon Web Services, AWS. Point 2424 Any relevant Netflix compliance requirements should be communicated to AWS. 2323 ISO 19600:2014, and Compliance Management Systems, Guidelines, www.iso.org/obp/ui/number ISO:/STD:ISO:1960:ed-19600:ed-1:v1:n2424 AWS, Netflix on AWS. AWS, https://aws.amazon.com/solutions/case-studies/Netflix 64 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 64. Cloud computing has a considerable impact on the compliance posture of CSPs and customers. From the CSP perspective, the main challenge is possibly the complexity of the legal and regulatory framework. Example, privacy rules vary by region and countries. Given the global nature of most CSPs' offerings and footprints, sometimes they must reconcile compliance with conflicting laws and regulations. Example, the EU General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, and USA Cloud ACT conflict with each other. While the Cloud ACT specifically contemplates court orders and warrants requiring the transfer of personal data without an international agreement, the European regulators concluded that service providers subject to EU law cannot legally base the disclosure and transfer of personal data to the US on such requests. 2525. In addition, CSPs are often expected to comply with multiple national, international and sector-specific laws or standards, which puts them under considerable pressure and exposes them to the issue of compliance complexity and fatigue. See Section 2.10 for more information. From the customer's perspective, there are similar challenges related to the complexity of the legal and regulatory landscape in addition to challenges related to the shared responsibility model. Like with cloud security responsibilities, a cloud customer can offset some compliance responsibilities to the CSPs, see Compliance Inheritance section, but it cannot outsource compliance accountability. Compliance continuity is the concept of maintaining compliance without interruption throughout any planned or unplanned change or event, whether internal or external. When moving to the cloud, the customer must take steps to ensure continuity of compliance. Planning for continuity of compliance with any cloud-related change throughout the cloud journey is key. This may include development of cloud specifications, submission of requests for information, RFIs, or requests for proposals, RFPs, CSP selection, service transition, service operations, and continuous monitoring of CSP's compliance efforts and changes. Evidence is crucial to any compliance audit or internal controls process because it affords signatories a reason to trust outstanding claims. Compliance management includes collecting evidence to show how the CSP supports the specific compliance rules and requirements. The cloud customer should reiterate all the compliance rules, orders, and requirements because some inherited compliance rules might be forgotten over time. Example, a local business that has been using a local data center may have avoided data export restrictions in the past. When the business decides to move to a public cloud provider, the rules and regulations and the CSP options should be iterated first. The responsibility for cloud security and compliance is shared. The CSP and the cloud customer have a role to play. Scope of compliance and the organizational accountability model. With the introduction of the cloud, customers transfer to CSPs not only some IT stacks, but also some responsibility for policies, standards, business requirements, and legal and regulatory requirements. Although security is a shared responsibility between the cloud service provider and the organization, with responsibilities distributed across the stack, compliance accountability remains with the customer. Generally, compliance responsibility reflects the degree of control that a party has over the architecture stack. Figure 1.16 shows a general shared responsibility model depending on the architecture. 2525 European Commission, Data Protection in the EU, https://ec.europa.eu/info/law/data-protection/data-protection-eu_and 65 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 65. While the shared responsibility model is more straightforward for public and private clouds, a hybrid cloud inherently carries more fluidity, because it encompasses various deployment and service models. Cloud customers and CSPs may rely on several other actors to carry out business activities. This also affects compliance responsibilities, as follows. Cloud customer: many actors may be involved in the compliance efforts. Internal, example different business units, information communication technologies, information cybersecurity systems, and external, example managed service providers, business partners, auditors, parties can be part of the cloud customer. Cloud service provider: many actors also can be part of CSP operations, such as subcontractors and sub-cloud service providers. When the supply chain consists of multiple layers, example a SaaS CSP uses a different IaaS CSP to deliver the service, each layer interacts only with the adjacent entity, at least legally. The cloud customer should ensure that all possible compliance issues inherent to the CSP subcontractors are under control. Compliance inheritance in cloud computing. Compliance inheritance refers to the idea of a CSC taking advantage of the CSP compliance efforts. Typically, cloud customers inherit compliance controls from a CSP in areas that are closely related to the Figure 1.16 Cloud Shared Responsibility Model. On-prem IaaS PaaS SaaS data applications runtime middleware O/S virtualization servers storage networking. Cloud customer is accountable, CSP is responsible, customer still accountable. Source: Scott T. CSRM, Cloud Shared Resource Model, Open Alliance for Cloud Adoption, October 13, 2018, www.oacia-project.org/2018/10/13/CSRM-cloud-shared- Resource Model /66 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 66. Security of the cloud infrastructure. Viewed more generally, the shared responsibility model affords insight into which controls are inherited from the CSP. Having such a mechanism in place is extremely important, because most public cloud providers do not grant customers the right to first-party auditing for compliance assurance. Example, the Guidelines on Securing Public Web Servers, NIST 800-44 version 2:2007, suggest that web servers be located in areas that provide secure physical environments with appropriate physical security protection mechanisms in place, including appropriate environmental controls to maintain the necessary humidity and temperature, a backup power source, etc. When an organization using a cloud solution for its web servers is required to show its alignment with this NIST document, the audit scope should include the physical security controls. Point 2626. A common mechanism for compliance inheritance concerns relevant third-party audit reports, such as certifications, which allow cloud customers to leverage attestations to fulfill compliance due diligence. The provider may have parts of its service certified as compliant, which would remove it from the customer's audit scope. Compliance inheritance is effective when a CSP has the capabilities to demonstrate compliance, including document generation, evidence production, and process compliance in a timely manner. Example, continuing with the previous example, even if the cloud provider does not allow any first-party audit, an independent CSA STAR, ISO 27001, PCI DSS or similar certification including related physical security controls could be used to show compliance. Cloud customers can be challenged to show auditors that the organization is in compliance. Assignment of compliance responsibilities to the provider and customer, and to indirect providers, i.e., the CSP of your CSP, can help both the cloud customer and the auditors. The scope of compliance plays a crucial role, figure 1.17. With compliance inheritance, the CSP infrastructure is out of scope for a customer's compliance audit, but everything the customer configures and builds on top of the certified services is still within scope. Building on top of a compliant CSP does not necessarily mean that the cloud customer is compliant too. Example, continuing with the previous example, collection of personally identifiable information is a function of the web application databases that the cloud customer manages and administers. It is not possible for the IaaS CSP to provide compliance with the privacy requirements of NIST 800-44 on behalf of the web solution. Hence, use of CSA STAR certified IaaS cannot solely ensure the customer's compliance. 2626 Tracy, M. W. Jensen, K. Scarfone, T. Winograd, Guidelines on Securing Public Web Servers, National Institute of Standards and Technology, September 2007, https://nvlpubs.nist.gov/nistpubs/legacy/sp/nist special publication 800-44 ver 2.pdf 67 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 67. When an organization uses any external service, such as a CSP, the external party is required to be compliant to the same orders, rules, and requirements as long as it is part of the related data processing. January 4, 12 Cloud Governance Tools, Cloud Policy Enforcement. This section covers all aspects of cloud policy from development to enforcement, either for a distinct standalone cloud policy or an integrated one reflected across an existing set of policies. The latter is likely to be the more common case. Cloud policy definition: policies, standards, and guidelines are related documents, although each serves a different purpose. For example, policies typically express at a high level how a particular risk is managed. According to the ISACA CISM Review Manual, policy is a statement of management intent. Supporting standards usually define controls to achieve the goals of the policy. Guidelines describing how may be used to further supplement the standards. What one organization calls a policy, another calls a standard. For example, a bank may use policies to express, at a high level, the what of how it manages a particular risk. It may have supporting standards to define controls to achieve the goals of the policy. It may further supplement the standards with guidelines that describe how. It is important for the customer to identify quickly how the organization uses those terms and whether it uses any recognized policy frameworks. If it is using a framework developed in-house, it is important to understand where and how it is referred to in the risk management framework when assessing it. Figure 1.17 Compliance Inheritance: Compliant Customer Application, Non-Compliant Customer Application, Customer Audit Scope, Provider Audit Scope, Cloud Service Regulation / Standard Policy, Cloud Policy Source, Mogul, R. J. Arlen, F. Gilbert, A. Lane, D. Mortman, G. Peterson, M. Rothman, Security Guidance for Critical Areas of Focus in Cloud Computing v 4.0, Cloud Security Alliance, 2017, https://downloads.cloudsecurityalliance.org/assets/research/security-guidance. Security Guidance v4 final.pdf 68 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 68. The intent of policies is to define the principles, criteria, and approaches to business risk management and operational improvement applicable to the organization. At the highest level, policy is a description of a set of control objectives or targets established to ensure that policy intent is met. Cloud policy statements often are woven into existing organization policy frameworks. Cloud computing is a relatively new concept, and most organizations are on a journey to get there. The rules an organization applies to its cloud operations may be spread out among its existing policies, standards, and guidelines rather than spelled out in a specific named cloud policy. For example, rules on access control and authentication for accessing confidential information will most likely be in the broader policy framework. First, the auditor should look at the cloud policies, and in their absence make the following determinations. The organization has identified cloud security as a risk. It has evaluated how to manage that risk. It has at least a work-in-progress set of control objectives that respond to that risk. A useful first step in understanding cloud security policy objectives or statements is to have a discussion with someone in the organization who is familiar with its policy framework and can discuss how any cloud-specific risk or control objectives have been addressed. If those elements are clearly absent, the auditor can call that out. However, if there are statements applicable to the cloud in other policies, it is not necessary to recommend that the organization has a standalone or separate cloud policy. Where does policy fit? Organizations typically have a hierarchy of policies to support their enterprise risk management. Some may have an overarching enterprise risk management framework, ERMF, document that describes how they identify, evaluate, manage, and respond to various risk conditions encountered in the process of doing business. Other organizations may have higher-level governance policies, with the ERMF considered a subcomponent. The ERM will likely have a series of policy documents that speak to particular risk named in the framework, such as a technology policy, which might fall under operational risk. Typically, cloud policy-related statements fall under those headings. Each policy statement has a goal and often refers to standards that define actions that support the goal. Under the standards, there may be optional guidelines that drill down to a procedural level, e.g., how the organization can deliver on what is defined in the standard. Breakdown of policy life cycle with CCM. The CSA is standardizing the language applicable to policy-related control objectives. Specifically, the risk management policy life cycle involves establishing, documenting, approving, communicating, implementing, enforcing, and maintaining policies and procedures. Establish. Having determined that it needs a policy, the organization defines its scope and goals, and considers how it might align with other policies. Document. After it has determined what the controls should be, the organization goes through a drafting process to develop a documented policy for approval. It also considers whether the policy needs to meet any regulatory or legal requirements. 69 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description. Image for page with label 69. Approved organizations often have a policy approval board or similar entity charged with reviewing proposed policies for the following. Fit. Potential impact. Does it materially increase the cost of doing business? Does it impact other functions? Are there provisions for exceptions to the policy? Alignment with other policies. Any missing material items. Adoption issues. Does it require further clarification? Does it need one or more supporting standards to underpin it? Does it have an implementation period? The approval board also checks evidence of consultation with various stakeholders. Communicate. The organization decides how to make it known that a policy has been approved. This is often a process, not an event. The information can be relayed as a communication to all employees, highlighted to senior managers to encourage the right behaviors regarding the policy. In a regulated environment, it may be communicated to persons with formal regulatory responsibility. There may be reminders, compliance dates, or deadlines to drive awareness and compliance with the policy, and to ensure that any concerns can be raised promptly. Implement. During the implementation period, program managers are assigned to develop an implementation plan or a program of work that is typically project managed. During this phase, there may be calls for supporting standards, clarifications, additional budget allocations, or personnel. There may be exceptions raised, although this may not begin until the enforcement phase. The policy creators may be contacted frequently during this phase. This is when the policy in its ideal state undergoes real-world implementation. Enforce. The enforcement phase typically follows the implementation period. Designated control owners are expected to have implemented the policy and be operating the controls in accordance with the policy. The flow of exceptions is lower than during the implementation period. Once a policy is being enforced, it is subject to planned or random internal audits. There may be measures or metrics showing evidence of compliance, and the policy itself may place evidential requirements on the control owners or operators. Maintain. The maintenance period is a period of reflection. As the organization and regulations evolve and as threats change, there is a need to update policies. An organization typically has a predetermined schedule for reviewing policies. The policy owner may state there are no changes required, or that a minor update is needed, or that a major overhaul is warranted. Having received feedback throughout this period, the policy owners may need to develop supporting standards to better assist control implementers to comply with the policy. This can be less complex than a high-level policy approval process, involving some supporting documents, example standards, or guidelines. Retire policies can be durable, but ultimately they all have a shelf life. Knowing when and how to retire policies is the job of the risk leadership. Sometimes it is self-evident when a policy should be retired. Perhaps the organization has evolved, or regulations have changed. A new policy may arrive, subsuming an older one. When organizing controls across the policy framework, relevant sets of controls relating to a key risk may sometimes be bunched together. Retiring a policy goes through an approval process, and there may be a sunset period, example 12 or 24 months, of agreement not to implement new controls, and not to subject new projects to enforcement of a policy that is going to be retired. Tip: the Policy Approval Board has a mandate from executive leadership, and that is normally reflected in the Enterprise Risk Management Framework. 70 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description. Image for page with label 70. Define responsible parties for policy enforcement. Typically, a policy may need sign-off by senior-level decision makers, whereas a standard may require sign-off only from the relevant stakeholder, such as the CIO, Human Resources, HR, or the risk team. Guidelines, example on database security or cloud security, tend to fall within the purview of technology teams, with review by the risk team. The organization should evaluate the cloud policy, or other policies applicable to cloud, in the context of the overall ERMF and technology strategy. Does the policy support and enable the needs of the technology strategy, or does it inhibit it? To drive accountability, each control within a policy may have a designated control owner who is responsible for making sure the control is implemented and that it operates as defined. The control owner is accountable for making sure the control is enforced. The control owner may not be the designer of the control itself. The function may be carried out by a domain-specific or expert group. It may be helpful to think in terms of the RACI model. A control owner may be informed about the health of the control, any defects or non-compliance. The shared responsibility model applies to cloud computing. The target organization will not have built all the controls, but it should have evaluated whether a user-facing control provided by the CSP is sufficient to meet the organization's control objective. Example: need to know. Some controls may be technical and others may be procedural. There may be an in-house mechanism for approving access requests for a particular cloud service, for example. Note: this section covers what is considered cloud-specific. There may be elements that are not cloud-specific but that are still the responsibility of the organization to evaluate. During the policy development stage, large organizations with multiple business units may have competing and conflicting cloud objectives or usage models. The cloud service user needs to determine how the policy owner has reconciled potential differences among different cloud objectives to arrive at a group policy that enables the organization to operate within its risk appetite, while fully leveraging various cloud services in the way the different business units wish to use them. In the organization decision-making process, if there is a group-level architecture board or committee, cloud policy decisions will be influenced by that group's decisions. The group will record meeting minutes reflecting decisions taken. Part of good policy design allows room for stakeholders to agree to disagree, but there can be trade-offs and acceptances. Major stakeholders may agree or disagree with a policy. If they disagree, there may be a risk that they will act in bad faith or choose not to follow it. Human Resources HR is a key stakeholder and often an early adopter of cloud services, particularly SaaS. The cloud impact on policy is especially relevant, due to the way HR policies are designed. The primary requirement of HR is that records are kept, accessible and keyword searchable, in keeping with reporting, alerting, and enforcement of acceptable usage guidelines. HR departments may need this assurance if they launch an investigation into an employee, or undertake an assessment of policy requirements concerning employee compliance with acceptable usage policies. HR will want to know if the organization is using cloud services for collaboration. Using cloud email may also be relevant because of a CSP data retention policy, because HR may have reason to review emails as part of an investigation. 71 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 71. Privacy, data sovereignty and data access rights are critical in a cloud context. A fundamental issue with cloud computing is the location where a CSP stores data. At a physical level, cloud storage can involve replicating data across multiple data centers, potentially in multiple jurisdictions. Of particular interest regarding data in cloud computing environments is the increasing commercial use and value of PII, personally identifiable information, and the sharing of PII across legal jurisdictions. The growing complexity of both ICT, information and communications technology, systems and data access requirements can make it difficult for an organization to ensure privacy and to achieve compliance with the various applicable laws. There is no single data access cloud control, since cloud services vary widely in their design. An organization may have policy requirements for third-party services to support role-based access control, RBAC. RBAC may be built into a cloud storage service, but it may require custom coding or integration with an existing data access solution. A public cloud service provider is a PII processor when it processes PII for cloud customers. From a cloud architectural perspective, consideration often should be given to the locality of the organization's cloud data relative to the processor. Where is it going to end up in order to be processed? This creates legal and privacy challenges, which might include whether US and EU agreements on privacy are sufficient for the organization's needs. Large organizations will have privacy schedules that have specific privacy requirements that may be linked to country or sector-specific legislation. Procurement. From a procurement perspective, the organization should establish good cloud cost management practices. In part, good cloud cost management requires visibility into usage levels and procurement methods, example employee use of company credit cards to purchase cloud services. It should centralize procurement around cloud billing, assessment of costs, and how well they match usage levels. Because cloud computing uses a consumption-based payment model, the organization should have billing alarms or other clear signals of overspending. A rising bill could indicate that an account has been misused or compromised. The organization procurement policy should define mechanisms to identify misuse, waste, or account takeover. It should apply best practices to billing and alert setup, setting soft or hard limits on spending proportional to what a given business function does. Is there evidence of good governance in place? Is the organization paying attention to billing trends? Different environments will handle billing differently. There may be a playpen or sandbox for testing new cloud services, trialing ideas, and allowing teams to test the effects of different security settings. Signs to watch for are whether workloads are tagged as critical or can be removed with no impact to the organization. Are there barriers to prevent accidental or intentional overspending on virtual machines? The absence of those barriers are an unmitigated risk. It is the equivalent of giving an employee an unlimited company credit card. Additional cloud policy enforcement guidance tip. It cannot be stated often enough, just like the cloud journey itself, the organization cloud policy will evolve and be refined over time as the implementation matures. 72 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 72. Procedures and technology. Procedures established under the cloud policy cover aspects such as user management. The target organization should have documented not just onboarding of cloud accounts, but the whole life cycle, how the accounts, master accounts, and sub-accounts are managed and monitored. A technical control is one part of a broader set of mitigations, and the organization should consider not only how the control mitigates the risk profile, but also the life cycle of that control. Once the organization determines that it needs a control, it must define what it looks like, put it through a governance process, and then decide where to deploy it. If it is determined that the health of the control is good, the control should be subjected to conformance testing to validate that it is operating as it should. See sections 2.7, 2.8, and 2.9 for more details on controls and control objectives. Define policy violation ramifications and response guidelines. The organization should have a means to identify, characterize, and respond to policy violations. It should define clear and measurable targets and objectives, and use very clear language about the conditions for policy violations. In addition, policies and their objectives should be clearly communicated across the organization. In simple terms, users should know what they are permitted to do with the cloud service, and if there is doubt, how they can consult the policy and determine which procedure to follow. Good cyber risk management in all cases requires reducing the blast radius of a policy violation. Cloud services help in this regard, because the controls that a CSP gives to a cloud user can often be configured to limit damage from a policy violation. This is the secure by default approach. The cloud customer, auditor, or assessor should become familiar with the limits or step-up procedures that require the CSP to take action in order for a significant cloud event to take place, example a deletion of a cloud account. Master accounts and subscription owner accounts are special and may require out-of-band interaction with the provider to delete those accounts or destroy fundamental data. There are different ways to manage ramifications, from reducing the materiality of a policy violation to executing follow-up HR processes. Note that these actions are not likely to be cloud-specific. A good example is data loss leakage. It is necessary to assess the organization data leakage program to identify whether its controls also apply to cloud environments. Response guidelines. Many target organization response guidelines are not cloud-specific. There should be prudent risk management, with evidence of scenario planning for violations involving cloud services. In larger or more formal environments, that evidence would be in the form of meeting minutes detailing scenarios that were constructed and analyzed. In smaller organizations, the guideline may be a one-page document outlining the scenarios it considered in terms of cloud risk events. The response guidelines may depend on who is violating the policy and the access the violating party has, whether it is a full-time internal employee, a contractor, or consultant. Response levels vary. At the manager level, there is visibility into the cloud actions a particular user has taken, and the manager receives alerts for violations. This activity flows into standard company response processes. A violation might require escalation to HR for misdemeanors or compliance issues. Actions by users with greater responsibility. 73 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 73. Such as cloud administrators, represent a bigger material risk, so the response to any violations should be part of the scenario planning. January 4, 13 Cloud Governance Tools, Cloud Contracts, Cloud Service Agreement and related documents. The legal terms of cloud service agreements are frequently set forth in several documents, such as agreements, policies, rules, etc. For example, the following are commonly found in a CSP portfolio of legal terms: Master Subscription Agreement or Master Services Agreement. Data Processing Addendum, example to accommodate the unique requirements of a specific law, such as GDPR, Terms and Conditions. Service Level Agreement, SLA, Acceptable Use Policy. License Agreement, End User License Agreement. Services Agreement, example Support Services, Professional Services Agreement. Website Terms of Service. There might be additional terms specific to a particular product or offering. Thus, the number of documents that may apply to a particular CSP service, their titles, and content vary from one CSP to another. It is important to ensure that the CSP and the customer agree on which documents, and which version of those documents, constitute the entire agreement for the specific service being purchased. Why so many components? Although each potential customer may prefer having a single all-encompassing contract to govern the services it receives from a CSP, most CSPs use dozens of different forms of contracts to accommodate the variety of their offerings and the different choices each customer may want to incorporate. In addition, the singling out of a particular concept in its own document may aid communications. For example, it may be easier to review an 8-page SLA to find the terms that pertain to the speed of communication, rather than to sift through a voluminous 88-page all-encompassing cloud service agreement that may not have the proper section header, forcing the reader to conduct a cumbersome word search to find the relevant section that addresses the topic. One contract comprising several documents. The fact that there are several components does not mean there are separate, independent contracts. Typically, each document contains a provision that indicates it is part of a larger document. For example, look for sentences such as this XXX agreement is made part of, and included in the YYY agreement, or this XXX agreement is made of the following terms and conditions, and also includes any document that refers to this XXX agreement. 74 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide. Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 74. These provisions are important because they are likely to affect the termination of a contract. If all components are deemed integrated into a single contract, then termination or breach of one of the contractual components may be deemed termination of the entire contract. Conversely, other forms of contract may contain a clause with opposite intent, such as termination of this XXX agreement will not be deemed termination of the YYY agreement. It is important that all parties to a contract for cloud services understand the interactions between the various components of the legal terms, and the consequences if any provision is violated. A contract formed of numerous parts may have some drawbacks. It is not uncommon to find provisions that conflict with each other. For example, one of the documents might provide for automatic termination of the contract upon expiration of the term, while another component may provide for automatic extension of the term from year to year, except upon notice by one of the parties X days before the end of the then current term. To avoid these often inadvertent conflicts, carefully written contracts include a specific clause that defines an order of precedence for the components of the contract. Contracts of adhesion and executed contracts. The law distinguishes contracts that are executed by both parties, manually or with a digital signature, from those that are not, which are deemed contracts of adhesion. In the cloud ecosystem, most contracts are contracts of adhesion, that is, the customer never signs a document, manually or digitally, but, instead, expresses consent by using the service. For example, the first page of a proposed contract may contain a conspicuously posted provision stating, "You automatically consent to these terms by using or logging into the service to which they pertain." The validity of contracts of adhesion is occasionally questioned, and litigation may ensue. This may happen, for example, if terms were not conspicuously posted or were egregious, or if they were changed without proper notification to the customer. In rare cases, entities that have significant leverage or bargaining power are able to press a CSP to negotiate the terms of the offering, and in such a case, the entire agreement or parts of it may be signed manually or digitally by both parties. Contract terms may vary over time. One of the most important consequences of the use of contracts of adhesion in lieu of executed contracts is that the terms of the former may easily vary over time. The provisions of a contract of adhesion take effect simply through a customer's use of the service after having been notified of the modifications. Changes in contract terms may have significant consequences for a customer. It is very important for a cloud customer to stay informed of the current terms of the contract and to monitor changes to the terms. Some CSPs may send a notice of change, and some may also provide access to the proposed new terms and indicate the date at which the change becomes effective. Examples: the content of a service agreement or customer agreement may vary from one CSP to another, and it is impossible to provide a checklist or analysis of the different clauses, as they may be located in different components of a CSP contract. 75 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide. Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 75. A customer agreement, for example, may require customers to observe and comply with terms of service, TOS, a separate document that may define user rights and responsibilities, data stewardship, privacy policy, opt-outs, and arbitration. It may also call out any terms that are specific to each service offered. The TOS may be supplemented by an acceptable use policy, AUP, a narrowly scoped document that restricts the ways in which the provided cloud services may be used. The document may also outline the actions a CSP may take if the customer fails to comply with the acceptable use policy. For example, a TOS may state that the customer agrees not to attempt to bypass or manipulate security controls related to shared infrastructure, or the offending account will be terminated. Service level agreements, SLAs, are generally used to specify the level of service that a provider promises to give to its customers and the standards with which it agrees to comply. They may set out the metrics for measuring the service, along with any remedies, penalties, or service credits if agreed service levels are not met. To illustrate how these agreements may interact, a customer agreement may state that the customer is responsible for properly configuring and using the services, or otherwise taking appropriate action to secure, protect, and back up its accounts and content to provide appropriate security. The terms of service for a cloud service may require customers to include certain disclosures in the privacy notices displayed to end users of their products and services, and an acceptable use policy may prohibit the customer from offering content on a CSP platform that is not in line with the applicable privacy laws. In general, these agreements are not negotiated with each customer. The CSP sets the terms and conditions and the customer either accepts them or finds another CSP. Occasionally, an entity may be able to negotiate carve-outs, damages, or changes in liabilities, if it has unique leverage. Terms of Service, TOS, specific to cloud similar to other types of contracts. The details of the contract terms help shape the relationship, the nature of the services purchased, the respective responsibilities of the parties, the conditions for termination of the contract, the representations and warranties each makes, and the allocation of risk. In most cases, the customer is unable to obtain changes to contract terms. In some cases, the alternative can be to acquire services offered at a higher price, but it is highly unlikely that the terms will be negotiable. It might be more productive for the entity to try to mitigate some of the potential risks by designing and developing systems, policies, procedures, and other structures that help compensate for shortcomings, anticipate potential new risk, supplement limited functionality, and otherwise add to the generic structure offered by the cloud service, addressing the gaps between the needed services and the limitations of the CSP. The person in charge of the cloud service evaluation may help identify the gaps and related need for corrective action, and work with the organization to determine what risk decision it made, how it was reached, and how it was communicated. Terms specific to the cloud. At the most basic level, cloud contracts contain the same types of provisions as contracts for other services. However, some provisions may have more importance and more drastic consequences in the cloud environment than in other settings, and thus may deserve more scrutiny. Consider, for example, the following: availability of the services on a 24/7 schedule. What does it mean for support downtime? Location of the servers, or of the CSP personnel overseeing the servers. What effect does it have on compliance with foreign laws, such as privacy laws or data localization laws? 76 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide. Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description. Image for page with label 76. Access to customer data. To what extent should the CSP have access to customer data, and what should be the limits on the CSP use or reuse of the data? Customer responsibilities. What do these responsibilities mean in practice in a distributed environment? How can the customer implement them in its internal policies or procedures? Use of third-party service providers. Most likely the customer will have no ability to object to the CSP use of third parties or contract staff. However, some privacy laws prohibit the use of subcontractors or subservice providers without the customer's prior consent. Disputes and overdue charges. What does the dispute resolution clause mean in practice? What leverage is left to the customer when the CSP can easily unplug the service? Termination for breach. If the sole remedy in a contract in case of breach is termination, what are the practical consequences for the customer? Price changes. What track record does the CSP have with respect to price and rate changes? What is the effect on budgeting? Transition and data portability. Is there such a clause? Does it provide the customer with sufficient time and assistance to move its data to another CSP? Changes in service, features, terms. Cloud services by nature are continually updated. Consequently, the related contract terms are likely to change to adapt to the changes in service. In general, cloud agreements require cloud customers to accept changes made by CSPs as they evolve their services. Those modifications can have drastic consequences for certain customers and must be monitored to ensure continuity of the customer's operations. For example, the retirement of a feature might break a key functionality on which the customer depends, or it might impact user-facing controls. The assessor should determine whether the cloud customer has an effective process in place to track and assess the impact of CSP changes in a timely way. The CSP agreement should be checked to determine whether customers are obliged to upgrade to the latest version of the service or if they can continue using the older version. If the cloud agreement allows the CSP to sunset any service within a set time, the customer may need to factor this risk into its own change plans. It may be useful for the auditor or assessor to discover what cloud services the entity may plan to consume in the future, to be able to give a forward-looking view. The cloud customer should ascertain that the people responsible for implementing new features are aware of what law applies to those elements, and know that they are responsible for interpreting the cloud service-specific law changes. Termination clauses. Termination language in CSP agreements is designed to provide a path for the CSP or its customers to end the agreement in a transparent and coordinated way. It should describe a termination process that either party can trigger. There are different types of termination, and they may have different consequences. Following are the most frequent types of termination. Termination for cause. This termination is triggered by a bad act committed by one of the parties, example the customer failing to meet its payment obligation, or the CSP repeatedly failing to meet its performance requirements. The termination is intended to punish the party at fault. Termination for convenience. This type of termination occurs at the initiative of one party and without the fault of the other party. For example, the customer may be involved in a sale or merger, and the entity resulting. 77 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide. Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description. Image for page with label 77. From the sale or merger wishes to consolidate different cloud services into a single relationship with a single CSP. Termination at the end of the term. This termination occurs when the term of the contract expires, and at least one of the parties does not wish to renew the relationship. A well-drafted CSP agreement should carefully describe the events that may trigger termination and the activities that are triggered by the termination of the contract. The more details provided, the easier the process is likely to be. One of the particularities of CSP agreements is that even though a contract is terminated according to its terms, several activities must occur to ensure that the customer may continue its operations should it wish to do so after the termination. In most cases, the cloud customer will want to transition the service to a different provider, and the CSP contract should clarify how the transition will occur. The customer-friendly termination clause should define the steps that enable the customer to retrieve its assets stored in the cloud, example its data, and data about its own customers. Many CSP termination clauses also provide a period during which the CSP will retain the data on its platform for the customer to download it. After that time has elapsed, the customer is responsible for gaining the CSP's assurance that the data was indeed deprovisioned, and not simply made inaccessible to the customer. Some CSP agreements may contain CSP-friendly clauses, example granting the CSP certain rights, such as the right to delete or aggregate any cloud service-derived data that relates to customer use of cloud services. An entity planning to use a cloud service should evaluate the effect of any such provisions, and consider whether they are consistent with its business model and meet any relevant legal restrictions. The level of data lock-in will determine the ease with which a CSP customer can retrieve its data. Interfaces to export data from CSPs vary significantly but in general are easiest from commodity IaaS and PaaS providers and hardest from SaaS providers. An additional consideration with leaving a SaaS provider is how to identify and obtain tenant metadata, such as user account structure and roles, permissions, and sharing settings, or indexes and dashboard designs. A SaaS tenant data export facility may not include much in the way of metadata, which can lead to slow and costly migrations for large organization. Even if a cloud customer may have evaluated the termination provisions during the sourcing process, keep in mind that most cloud services agreements evolve over time, and the termination rules may change during the life of the agreement. The cloud customer should fully understand the termination process. Because the termination can be triggered by either side in most cases, the prudent cloud customer should devise reasonable plans to retrieve its data within the standard time frames stated in the agreement and keep those plans up to date. Cloud SLAs. CSPs use SLAs to express expected results to their customers, usually related to performance attributes of a cloud service and the metrics used to assess them. A cloud SLA defines the parameters for delivery of the cloud service, and what happens when something falls outside those parameters. The customer and CSP refer to it in the event of an outage or degradation of service. Cloud SLAs are important to several stakeholders within a single organization. For technology operations, this law defines what they can expect from the cloud provider service. The Technology Operations Group will typically manage any deviation from that service. 78 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 78. For the sourcing and finance functions, this law is linked directly to financial spend and sourcing due diligence. For the governance or control functions, this law is considered the reference for how events will be interpreted, particularly for assessors and auditors. The key components of this law are outlined in Figure 1.18. What has been done for performance in SLAs can also be done for security. The standardization community has been working to build SLAs for cloud computing through the development of ISO/IEC 19086. ISO/IEC 19086 defines three important concepts: metric standard of measurement that defines the conditions and the rules for performing the measurement and understanding the results of a measurement; cloud service level objective, SLO, commitment to cloud service provider. ISO/IEC 17788:2014, March 2, 15, makes for a specific, quantitative characteristic of a cloud service. ISO/IEC 17788:2014, 3.2.8, where the value follows the interval scale or ratio scale cloud service qualitative objective. SQO, commitment to cloud service provider. ISO/IEC 17788:2014, March 2, 15, makes for a specific, qualitative characteristic of a cloud service. ISO/IEC 17788:2014, 3.2.8, where the value follows the nominal scale or ordinal scale. Build/evaluate cloud SLAs. In most cases, CSPs are reluctant to allow a third party to evaluate their SLAs and performance. There are practical issues, disruption to the CSP's business, financial issues, making staff available for such audits instead of attending to other tasks, and legal and liability issues, example giving a third party access to some of the CSP's most prized assets. CSPs generally prefer to use external, independent auditors or attestations of security or compliance as a substitute for customer on-site audits. Figure 1.18 SLA Key Components. Component Description 1. Statement of intent or objectives outlines the reasons for an overarching purpose of this law. 2. List of services to be provided describes the duties of the service provider and customer, and any means for conflict resolution. 3. Availability and uptime. Time period and frequency for which CSP services must be available to the customer, uptime percentage usually measured and reported monthly. 4. Performance standards. Standards or benchmarks a CSP is prepared to commit to and deliver against, used to measure actual CSP service level performance to ensure standards are met. 5. Response time. Minimum and maximum amount of time that a CSP will take to respond to a request, may specify the form of approved requests, example raising a ticket, rather than a free-form email to a help desk. 6. Resolution time. Minimum and maximum amount of time that a CSP commits to resolve a task or issue. 79 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 79. Defining metrics and KPIs to monitor provider performance. Key performance indicators and metrics provide a window for assessing whether a CSP is delivering the services the customer expects to receive, at the required level and speed. They are important because the customer may be paying significant financial sums and trusting the CSP with potentially material amounts of sensitive business data. Consistent failure by the provider to fulfill the metrics and KPIs is often an early indicator of a more significant issue between the customer and the provider. From the customer's perspective, defining metrics and KPIs forces internal decision makers to reach a consensus on what is important, or what constitutes a service operating within or outside or materially outside its risk appetite. In theory, metrics are numbers related to service performance or customer requirements that are easily comparable. The source of most metrics for the CSP is the slot, and the target organization must define its own metrics relevant to IT, risk and control owners. It then must map those metrics to the CSP activity. Actions required for missed and continual missing of CSP contract terms. Some CSP agreements may include an escalating set of corrective actions and supporting operating procedures the provider will take. From the customer perspective, there ideally should be a document that describes the trigger points for those corrective actions and the CSP operating procedure. The trigger for action may be in response to the CSP identifying that it has missed metrics, in terms of quality or speed. Ideally, the CSP contract should include a definition of what constitutes missed KPIs. An action can simply be communication. SLAs typically define communication points linked to escalations. For example, if an event goes outside of tolerance and the parties have established a structure for periodic meetings, the incident will be discussed during the next account manager meeting call. If the event materially exceeds tolerance, it may be mapped to a priority 1 ticket within the IT governance operations, and so on, escalated through layers of management. In some cases, the cloud customer may be able to define action at a certain point to involve redirecting traffic from the affected service to a standby service or an alternate CSP, or to communicate to customers that the service may be unavailable. If the cloud customer is a regulated entity, it must have a stated plan for how it would migrate from one provider to another. Contract terms and allocation of responsibility. Like other contracts for services, CSP agreements allocate responsibilities between the CSP and the customer. Contracts typically aim to establish a reasonable allocation of risks among the parties, taking into account market conditions, competitive offerings, pricing, demand, each party's needs, and the like. In the end, each party agrees to take certain actions and assume certain responsibilities. However, these responsibilities and risks concern only the relationship between the CSP and the cloud customer. Unless specifically and clearly stated in the contract terms, the CSP does not agree to be responsible to the cloud customer's own customers. The CSP is responsible only for providing the service that it committed to provide, and it is only responsible to the cloud customer. Unless contract terms state otherwise, the cloud customer remains fully responsible to its own clients, customers, patients, or end users, collectively end user, for any incidents that might have occurred while using the CSP services or that might have been caused by the CSP. While the cloud customer might be able to seek recourse against the CSP for damages it incurred while using the cloud services, most CSP agreements are not intended to establish a direct line of responsibility to the customer's own clients, customers, patients, or end users. There is no privity of AD Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 80. Contract between the CSP and the end users, and most cloud contracts do not make end users third-party beneficiaries of the contract. Privity of contract. CSPs and their customers establish the terms of their relationship through a contract. The contract is usually between two specified parties, e.g., the CSP and the customer, but, occasionally, it can include several parties, example the CSP and all the subsidiaries or affiliates in a group of companies. The contract only binds the parties listed in the contract as having signed, manually or digitally, or having expressed their consent otherwise, by using the contract. Unless it is clearly specified in the terms of the contract, the concept cannot bind an entity that did not sign or consent to it. This concept is known as privity of contract. This situation can occur in a cloud context. For example, assume there is a contract between a customer and CSP, example for cloud services, and another contract between the CSP and a sub-processor, example for hotline services. Assume the sub-processor hotline service is down periodically, which causes the customer to lose business. The customer cannot make a claim against the sub-processor for breach of contract because there is no privity of contract between the customer and the sub-processor. The customer cannot seek compensation from the sub-processor under a breach of contract theory because there is no contract between the customer and the sub-processor. To obtain compensation from the sub-processor for poor performance, the customer needs to find a cause of action other than breach of contract. Alternatively, the customer should complain to, and seek recourse from, the CSP, which then needs to reach out to its sub-processor for compensation for the damages the CSP paid the customer, if any, as a remedy for the deficiencies in the sub-processor service. Third-party beneficiary. Continuing with the example, it would have been possible for the customer to act directly against the sub-processor, if the contract between the customer and the CSP included a clause under which the customer was deemed a third-party beneficiary of certain provisions of the contract between the CSP and the sub-processor. Occasionally, a contract may contain a clause that makes an entity that is not a party to a contract, a third-party beneficiary of certain provisions of the contract. This is the case, for example, in Clause 3 of the EU Standard Contractual Clauses Controller to Processor, Ccak, Point 2727. Clause 3 provides that if a processor/data importer and a controller/data exporter have agreed to the terms of the Ccak, an individual whose personal data is being collected by the controller and processed by the processor is a third-party beneficiary of certain enumerate provisions of the Ccak contract between the controller and the processor, against the processor, or against any sub-processor that agreed to be bound by the terms of the Ccak contract. Use of third-party service providers. In practice, cloud services are seldom provided by a single CSP. Even if a cloud customer engages a first-tier CSP, it should keep in mind that the CSP is likely to subcontract some services to third parties, sub-processors. CSP agreements usually contain a provision that gives the CSP the right to engage third parties to act as sub-processors. Those provisions put the cloud customer on notice that third parties may participate in the provision of the cloud services. That does not mean, however, that the cloud customer is granted the ability to interact directly with those sub-processors, or to file breach of contract claims against sub-processors for defective service. 2727 European Commission, Standard Contractual Clauses, SCC, https://ec.europa.eu/info/law/data-protection/international-dimension-data-protection/Standard Contractual Clauses SCC_N81 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 81. That is because there is no privilege of contract between the cloud customer and sub-processor, and there likely is no specific third-party beneficiary provision granting special rights to the cloud customer. Provisions required by law. Continuing the example of a customer engaging a CSP, which then engages a sub-processor for matters that relate to the customer, it is clear that especially in the cloud context, where CSP contract terms rarely can be negotiated, a customer seldom has the ability or the leverage to dictate to a CSP whether to engage a sub-processor, or the terms of the contract between CSP and sub-processor. To cover that situation, and to protect individuals who would have no control over a sub-processor handling their data, several laws and regulations require that contracts involving the processing of personal data or personal information contain specified provisions to limit the right of the prime data processor to subcontract services to third parties. This is the case, for example, with Article 28 of the EU General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, and provisions of the HIPAA regulations in the US, in the case of business associate contracts, which require that contracts with certain subcontractors contain specified clauses. It is important to identify the particular kind of data that might be at stake, because national or sectoral law may impose contract provisions with specified requirements. Why internal controls may be needed. Internal controls are needed to ensure that the organization correctly applies its security and privacy policies to its cloud activities. Employees could accidentally or maliciously onboard unapproved third-party services that might expose the organization to material risk, including inappropriate control of personal information, PI. This can lead to security incidents, such as network layer attacks, and consequent reputational damage. Numerous data leaks have been traced to cloud storage systems that held sensitive data in an easily readable format. Storage permissions are a CSP client-operated control under the shared responsibility model. The fault in these instances lay with the customer for poor implementation by failing to apply its own internal data protection policies correctly. The policy control could be a technical control, example an independent cloud security monitoring service that queries the cloud service to identify non-compliant integrations or extensions. Some controls cannot be easily digitized and are implemented as offline paper controls that rely on employees' goodwill and adherence. Large organizations tend to engage an independent third-party cloud service for configuration, monitoring, and assurance. It also may continually check for inappropriate integrations, unapproved storage, or other control violations. How contracts impact action in the event of breach. This section explores two types of breaches, a data or security breach, and a breach of the service or contractual agreements between a CSP and a customer. Data breaches. For almost 2 decades, legislators throughout the world have made efforts to develop laws that address the consequences of data breaches, i.e., breaches of security that affect personal data. California, in 2002, became the first state to enact a law requiring private entities and government agencies to disclose to their customers or 82 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 82. Constituents. The occurrence of a breach of security affecting certain categories of personal data. The concept has spread throughout the United States and to a large part of the world. Most developed countries have incorporated data breach notification requirements in their national laws. For example, the EU General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, which took effect in May 2018, requires data controllers and data processors to issue notifications when a data breach, as defined in the applicable law, occurs. Data breach laws generally require that the entity responsible for custody of the data notify government agencies and/or affected individuals when certain specified categories of personal data are stolen, accessed or modified without proper permission. The incident that triggers the disclosure obligation is often identified as a data breach. These laws usually require entities that process data on behalf of others to notify the custodian of the data about a security incident that might be deemed a breach. The custodian can then mitigate the consequences of the breach and complete the required notifications to the government agencies and/or the affected individuals. Data breach laws contain most or all of the following provisions: definition of what constitutes a data breach, data controller obligation to notify the relevant government authority, depending on the nature of the breach, data controller obligation to notify the affected individuals, depending on the nature of the breach, data processor obligation to notify the relevant data controller of the occurrence of a data breach, time frames for sending breach notices, information to be provided to the persons or entities to whom the breach notices are to be sent. While each law has its specific provisions, and each country has its way of reacting to a breach, such as litigation, class action lawsuits, or investigation by the country regulatory agencies or data supervisory authority, the common element is that data breaches have become a source of significant financial, legal, commercial and reputational risk to many organizations. Provisions addressing activities in case of a data breach, the interaction of the CSP and customer, and the related compensation or damages deserve scrutiny. The customer should review the contract for specific terms concerning breach notification and for commitments the CSP formally makes, if any, for handling the process. If an organization needs to meet certain regulatory requirements, it should make sure the agreement covers the CSP ability to help deliver on those requirements. The extent to which the organization is locked into one CSP, e.g., if the provider holds all of its data, has a material impact on the actions open to it in the event of a breach. If the cloud service affects the customer organization supply chain, the customer must evaluate what services it provides to its own customers, and the services a CSP provides to the customer. If the terms do not align, then the organization might be in breach of contract in the event of breach of security at the CSP. A distinction needs to be made between the customer's controls leading to the breach and the CSP controls leading to it. For instance, did the customer configure the user-centric controls in a certain way that led to the breach? Or was the breach due to a CSP defect causing a control failure that led to a breach? There may be a circumstance in which the CSP suffers a breach and the customer is left waiting to find out if its data has been impacted. In the contract, a CSP may want to exercise caution regarding breach notification commitments it makes. Note, as well, that there may be a difference between who caused the breach and who is responsible for the breach notifications. Most data breach notice laws make the data controller responsible for the notifications to those individuals with whom it has contact, whereas an entity acting in a data processor, or service provider's capacity, is responsible for notifying its customer, the data controller, in most cases, but has no obligation vis-a-vis the data subjects, with whom it has no direct contact. Thus, it is important that the contract for services properly identify the respective obligations of the parties in a manner that takes into account their legal obligations under applicable laws. 83 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 83. Tip: it may be explicitly written that there may be circumstances in which a CSP cannot notify customers of a breach because the breach is being investigated by law enforcement, and the CSP has been requested not to make public the occurrence of the breach. It is good practice for organizations to perform breach scenario testing prior to signing contracts with CSPs to explore and assess how it might react to a breach of contract by the CSP. In addition to planning prior to an incident, this can include scenario role-playing, potential actions during a suspected breach, and post-breach activities. Under the shared responsibility model, cloud clients give up elements of control and have less visibility into communication flows and security events than with an on-premises model. The shared responsibility model requires more cooperation regarding actions related to a data breach. It may be useful to check whether, and how, a CSP, such as a SaaS provider, has helped with breaches in the past. When an organization cloud enables its incident response, it must accept limitations on visibility and control, which makes it more dependent on the terms of the contract with the CSP. The client's expectations should align with the service agreement it has signed with the cloud provider. The use of cloud services can enable organizations to take an image of a specific virtual instance quickly and analyze it rapidly. Some CSPs enable customers to sniff networks, which can be useful when analyzing an incident scenario. Numerous companies have incident response plans, IRPs, in place to guide their personnel on how to react to a security incident that might occur on the company premises or in its systems, or that might affect one of its service providers. To ensure that all relevant personnel are able to perform in emergency mode in accordance with the IRP, companies organize periodic tabletop exercises to train their personnel in how to identify a security incident and determine whether it may constitute a data breach under applicable laws. Some contracts for cloud services that involve large customers may include provisions requiring tabletop exercises to prepare for a potential security breach involving data stored in a third party's cloud. Organizations should review their cyber insurance policies, in light of their agreements with CSPs, to identify contractual remedies, conflicts, or gaps in coverage or responses. Breach of contract. This section is concerned with allegations of breach of contract, where one party suspects or claims that the other party has breached their agreement, potentially or actually causing harm. While CSP-specific contracts vary, there are some common themes. Some are specific to the cloud, and others are common practices in contracts generally. With any contract, either party may breach its contractual obligations. Following are some examples of contract breaches. These examples assume that the relevant CSP contract contains specific provisions that prohibit certain actions, and that a court evaluating the dispute would determine that one of the described activities breached a specific provision of the contract. Client failure to follow instructions. The customer may, after having requested permission from the CSP, engage in security testing of its workloads hosted at the CSP, but in the process harm shared components of CSP infrastructure. This situation might be a breach of contract if the contract includes provisions that require the customer to act with prudence when conducting its activities and ensure that its activities are not detrimental to other tenants of the CSP. Inappropriate disclosure of exclusive contractual terms. A customer may have secured favorable terms with the CSP, e.g., it may have secured increased financial liability from the CSP. This situation might be 84 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 84. Deemed a breach if the contract contains a provision prohibiting the disclosure of contract terms or specifying that contract terms are confidential. Bad tenant behavior. Unsociable or extremely heavy use of a CSP management API can impact CSP operations. In extreme cases it can impact platform availability. Mature CSPs tend to have well-developed API throttling controls, but less mature CSPs may not. Extremely heavy use might be deemed a breach of contract if the contract contains provisions that would be interpreted as prohibiting certain uses of the platform. For example, a code of conduct, rules of the road or code of ethics document incorporated into the contract might prohibit repetitive activities that are likely to disturb the operation of the service. CSP inappropriate disclosure of client information may be an issue if the contract contains a provision prohibiting the disclosure of confidential information and the definition of confidential information includes customer information or terms that can be interpreted as meaning or including customer information, and if other provisions of the contract do not exclude certain aspects of the client information, example information that would have been disclosed to third parties without an obligation of confidentiality. Inappropriate access to, or use of customers' workloads or data by a CSP employee. CSP help desk staff might access, copy or reuse customer data for personal purposes, for example, or to develop a competing business. This activity might violate a contract provision prohibiting the service provider and its sub-processors from using customer data for purposes other than providing the service to the customer. Inappropriate access to, or use of the customer's confidential proprietary assets. The CSP may access the customer's methods and / or source code, business model, or processes for reasons other than to perform the services defined by the contract, example to increase market share. This activity might violate a confidentiality provision in the contract to the extent that the data accessed and reused are confidential information protected under that provision. Most contract confidentiality provisions identify the information, documents, customer lists, and research and development plans that are to be protected, and for which any use or reuse for purposes other than the strict performance of the contract is prohibited. January 4, 14 Cloud Governance Tools, Security Assessments. This section describes cloud security assessments. Although a cloud assessment or audit may be part of a broader organizational assessment, this section focuses purely on evaluating the cloud-related people, policies, technologies, and techniques. Scope, timing, and nature of cloud assessments. There can be many triggers for an evaluation or an audit. One may be needed for contractual reasons, or because the auditee is a regulated business. Another trigger may be that a venture capital firm is interested in purchasing a business or startup that uses cloud technology and wants to check for any potential downside risk before investing. A CSP may have already published a security white paper that describes its data center and platform controls, and the security standards it has adopted. Although this approach is generally welcome, prospective customers may have internal policies that require suppliers to provide evidence of an independent certification of management controls against a recognized security standard. Beyond this, some customers will have higher assurance requirements that require CSPs to seek an independent attestation of their control design and operating effectiveness. Knowing your stakeholder, i.e., who has requested the audit, and knowing their requirements should guide the type of audit to be performed. 85 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following. Scoping is critical to any evaluation, but it is even more important in the case of cloud services. When analyzing the supply chain in the cloud and establishing governance, the scoping exercise is key to identifying the different parties involved and defining what parts of a cloud service are or are not in scope. When scoping any kind of cloud assessment, the assessor typically looks not at an audit or assessment of the CSP but at the organization, auditee, use of a cloud service. Therefore, the true scope of the evaluation will be the customer-facing controls of that cloud service. The assessor or auditor is allowed to look at the objects and services belonging to the cloud tenant or owner's account. The auditor may also look at some other objects and services but will not have permission to test them. The auditor's role is not just to assess a particular service but to assess the way the organization designed and developed it and, more broadly, whether the design and implementation support and align with the organization's strategic objectives. Some considerations: how does the service interplay or interact with other services, whether internal or external/cloud services? What is the inventory of data flows across the service supply chain, and what are the information security requirements and likely volumes of flows? How is user management handled, and what is its approval process? How are decisions about accounts reflected in an audit log? The auditor will consider questions like the following: were these controls and their designs checked by a third party? Is it possible to review the conformance tests to see whether the tool or service meets the owner's control objectives? The auditor needs to consider the shared responsibility model when evaluating whether each control is present and effective. For example, to assess security awareness, an auditor may review policies and standards, looking for evidence of management requiring that all employees receive regular awareness training, testing, example phishing simulations, and performance feedback. In the context of the cloud, the organization must also consider this control through the lens of the shared responsibility model. Does the organization, cloud customer, have an awareness training program in place? Has the organization, cloud customer, checked that the CSP has an awareness training program in place? In more general terms, the auditor must evaluate the design and the operating effectiveness of each control, i.e., is the control working as designed, in respect to the following: what is the organization doing for the portion of the control it is directly responsible for? What is the organization doing for the portion of the control that is under the CSP responsibility, but that the organization is still accountable for? Two-dimensional thinking is a common theme that must be grasped and applied correctly to think like a cloud auditor. Taking this theme deeper, following are some questions designed to help organize an auditee's thinking and shape the auditor's questions. Is it reasonable to expect a given control to be mirrored at both the CSP and the client? In the security awareness example, in which a CSP client is the auditee, both organizations would be expected to operate such a control independently of each other. The control objective and design may be very similar at a high level, but the implementation and operation of the control may differ. The CSP may be focused on reducing social engineering. 86 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 86. Of its help desk staff, for example, whereas the client, example a bank, may be training its digital teams to recognize internet-facilitated fraudsters. In the context of cybersecurity and the shared responsibility model, the client and CSP have similar control responsibilities, and both must be operated effectively to defend against social engineering attacks. Is it reasonable to expect a given control to be layered across the CSP and client? For example, the CSP provides its clients with logical access controls to manage access to cloud storage. This user-facing control is underpinned by both logical and physical access controls that the CSP operates, i.e., it implements them in the cloud platform. In this example, it is clear the overall responsibility for access control is divided between the CSP and its client. However, it also follows that even if the CSP platform is secure and operates within the CSP's stated control parameters, the CSP client can suffer a breach for failing to operate the user-facing controls properly. Is a given control operated by entities beyond the CSP and client? In complex multi-cloud/party cloud constellations, the auditor will need to consider how many hands are on the controls to identify the control operators involved. Taking this idea further, the auditor should then consider how many fingers of each hand are on the control to assess the materiality, or weighting, of each control operator. To help direct and estimate the level of effort and analysis the auditor should apply. In summary, the role of the auditor is to take the following steps for each control: identify the nature and placement of in-scope controls, along with control operators. Verify the auditee is operating the control within its organization, within the scope of the audit. Verify the auditee is asking the right questions of the CSP and other control operators. Some cloud providers permit hands-on security testing of workloads and services operating on their platforms, but there are constraints and this is subject to permission. An IaaS provider may allow hands-on security testing of a virtual machine that is operated by the audit sponsor or account owner. However, the same testing on the cloud authentication service used by all cloud services would be out of scope. Timing assessment execution options range from periodic checks to continuous assessment. The choice of option depends on the value of data and the risk associated with it. Traditional assessments tend to be annual and may be driven by contractual agreements. However, the cloud provides new ways of auditing, and the technology available to help with this process enables more frequent checking. This can lead to a set of hybrid assessments and audits, deeper but less frequent audits, or continuous assessments that are more frequent and automated, and that check for control and governance metrics. The timing depends on the receiver of the findings. It may depend on the availability of key staff or dependencies on others if the auditee is part of a complex supply chain, and on the availability of staff at subcontractors or at another provider. There may also be periods during the working day when assessment work is not possible, e.g., on a trading floor, an assessment activity cannot take place during regular business hours because of the potential operational risk. Nature: most cloud security assessments are logical in nature rather than physical, i.e., they involve checking software controls as opposed to physical security. Some cloud providers may not let the auditor of a customer visit their data centers, but at a minimum they should be able to give documentary evidence of the existing and emerging security standards they follow. 87 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 87. For the purposes of an audit, the auditor will need to treat some of the provider's security controls as a black box, effectively, but will be able to query the user-facing controls that the customer can configure in order to implement its own security policies. Some CSPs have developed and documented a shared responsibility model. The service provider is responsible for the security of its service, and the customer, auditee, is responsible for the security of the data. The role of the auditor is to assess the controls the cloud provider exposes to its clients and how the client uses them. It can be helpful to apply a RACI model to understand who in the auditee's organization is responsible for these controls, who is accountable, who contributed, and who is informed. The auditor needs to establish the nature of the relationship between the cloud provider and its customer, which will determine exactly where responsibilities lie. An audit can take two forms: a top-down risk-based approach that starts with reviewing policies and standards to select key controls to audit, or a bottom-up process-based approach to test the security of individual controls. Example: a vulnerability scan that identifies gaps in security controls. See section January 4, 14. Regardless of the approach taken, risk will need to be evaluated and prioritized in a consistent manner. Tip: from the practitioner's point of view, account design is more critical than ever when setting up a cloud environment. In a large organization, there is a master account and then sub-organizations that create cloud user accounts, often given to divisional technology leaders. The account design model is driven by billing and security. Types of security assessment. This section describes, at a high level, some common types of security assessments. It is up to the auditor to evaluate the capability and maturity of the auditee's security and to judge whether the controls are effective. Audit assessments. It is important to point out the distinctions between an audit and an assessment. The terms are sometimes used terms interchangeably, but there are crucial differences in the level of formality, assurance, and admissibility as certain types of evidence. Audits can be internal or external but must involve a trained and certified auditor, whereas an assessment may be carried out by the organization or an auditor. An audit involves much more planning activity because the level of rigor is much higher than for an assessment. An assessment may employ some of the same principles, practices, and processes as an audit, but it does not have to. Assessments can result in ambiguous findings. An audit should provide greater clarity. For example, an assessment might determine how many invoices an organization did not pay within 30 days. An audit would involve inspecting some invoices and checking specific payments. External audit assessments can be carried out to check how a provider is upholding its end of the shared responsibility model. Some audit assessments are internal and conducted to identify cloud customer controls that are non-compliant with the organization policies or that fail to meet best practice standards. Vulnerability assessment. A vulnerability assessment is one part of the vulnerability management process. It is typically used in environments with considerable IT assets. A vulnerability assessment identifies and assesses technical vulnerabilities in an IT environment. It uses scalable commodity technology to carry out an automated series of technical tests quickly and cost-efficiently. The result is a detailed technical report with a set of findings. An assessor should then review and evaluate the findings to eliminate false positives. This typically involves executing manual follow-up technical tests or Fact 88 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 88. Checking with the relevant IT administrators. A more challenging issue is how to handle potential false negatives vulnerabilities that are present in the target but are not identified. Credible assessors will understand the appropriateness, capabilities, and limits of their chosen assessment tools and techniques, and will consequently characterize any specific limitations, restrictions, or caveats in their assessment report. The next step is to assess, and potentially adjust, the default risk rating that was automatically assigned to the vulnerabilities identified by the assessment tools. This may be necessary to take into account the organization policies, risk rating definitions, asset value, and ease of exploitation. In the context of IaaS, a traditional vulnerability assessment will scan customer-managed virtual machines to identify vulnerabilities in both operating system and application infrastructure contained within the customer's instances. Although this continues to be a best practice, it is insufficient because it does not include an assessment of the broader set of CSP platform user-facing controls. This leads us to a consideration of the emerging practice of cloud platform security assessments. Note that cloud providers differ regarding notification requirements for vulnerability scanning, even if scanning customers' own servers on IaaS. Always consult the trust and security parts of their websites. Cloud Platform Security Assessment. A cloud platform security assessment seeks to identify vulnerabilities or weaknesses in user-facing cloud controls. It is a review of the customer configuration of a cloud tenant. An example of an activity included in a cloud platform security assessment is reviewing whether the permissions on storage buckets are appropriate for the information they contain. The scope of a cloud platform security assessment depends on the CSPs and cloud services that support and deliver the technology target of the audit. A complex or multi-CSP environment will require careful scoping to manage the size of the review. In general, the assessor should start with targeting a broad scope that encompasses not just the services used to deliver a particular business system, but all relevant and supporting cloud services. After sizing the scale of the resulting audit work, elements may need to be deprioritized or removed, with rationales clearly documented. A simpler audit scope may be a lift and shift cloud-hosted 3-tier website. This may consist of one or more front-end web servers and application servers, and a back-end database layer. An assessment of that environment would include both the contents of the virtual machines and the cloud management controls such as cloud accounts, authentication settings, account privileges, access controls to the CSP management interfaces, virtual network configurations, instances of firewall settings, cloud storage security settings, etc. More complex environments may include multiple cloud tenant subscriptions at one or more CSPs. For example, a software development company may use dedicated subscriptions per client, supplemented with multiple shared subscriptions for management accounts and shared cloud objects. The company may use a separate CSP for long-term data storage, so consider which elements to include. These scoping decisions are part of planning and should be made prior to commencing the review. The resulting scope should be challenged to ensure it makes logical sense and does not exclude key elements. For SaaS environments, a cloud platform security assessor may be required to have business domain-specific knowledge, or be assigned a business partner for the review, to properly assess risk. It is one thing to identify technical security issues, such as single-factor authentication for highly privileged accounts, but another to identify that a particular set of roles assigned to a single account in a banking backend may lead to toxic risk combinations. 89 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 89. Penetration testing. A penetration test, also known as a pen test, is typically a highly focused technical test of a technology, platform, or organization. It is usually a manual or human-driven test that relies on the expertise, judgment, and experience of the penetration testing team. Penetration tests may begin with a vulnerability scan, but unlike vulnerability scans, testers might try to exploit the vulnerability. Therefore, penetration testing should result in fewer false positives and better findings. One more difference between a vulnerability scan and pen testing is that scans are limited to the technology infrastructure and application, whereas pen testing can expand to include more techniques such as human engineering, and manipulating the security processes in addition to the technology layer. A penetration test generally results in fewer findings and fewer false positives than a vulnerability assessment. A subset of penetration testing is application security assessments, which attempt to identify business logic flaws and other technical weaknesses in custom business applications or platforms, as opposed to a technical device or off-the-shelf software. The test usually identifies the kind of vulnerability classes found in the OWASP top 10. Penetration tests vary in scope but typically are divided between application level or infrastructure level. In cloud implementations, penetration testing is primarily associated with assessing the application layer, which may itself be composed of multiple cloud services. In most cases, CSP customers are not permitted to test the underlying infrastructure. A growing number of security tools can automate some simpler aspects of penetration testing, but until there is a step change in tool intelligence, penetration testing remains an expert-driven manual activity. CSPs with mature pen testing programs proactively test new platform features before they migrate to production. Some embed penetration testing techniques, tooling and personnel in their software development and build processes. Teams that test pre-production software early and often can discover and eliminate potential security flaws at a lower cost and with less operational risk than either a point-in-time penetration test or a vulnerability report from a security researcher or client. This shift-left approach being adopted as part of the DevOps approach reduces the cost to address vulnerabilities by finding them earlier in the development cycle. See Chapter 8 for more on this approach. CSPs can deliver software features that their customers want faster and with measurable assurance. Consequently, point-in-time penetration tests tend to find fewer security vulnerabilities and become less of a security event. This arguably means they offer less value, and some seek to phase them out as a duplicate security cost. The counterargument is that a suitably scoped penetration test by a third-party expert provides independent evidence that software security controls are operating effectively in practice. In light of these sweeping changes in software development, an auditor needs to recognize security assessment controls distributed across teams and processes. Examples include upfront threat modeling of a new software feature, mandatory security testing toll gates, which in turn may underpin higher-level governance toll gates, and penetration tests of software features or modules. These tend to be smaller in scope and more frequently executed than traditional penetration tests, only validating new or changed software features but more often. Other leading-edge controls include the introduction of malicious software unit tests, example SQL injection in login parameters, often co-developed with penetration testers, security scans of source code for common vulnerabilities, and security analysis of third-party software components and dependencies. With the rise of software feature penetration tests, an auditor should examine the decision-making that drives the selection, scope, depth, and timing of features that are tested. This includes examining whether the triggers for a test are appropriate given the role of the feature. A trigger could be a point in time, a new version of a software feature that implements a key security control, a regulatory requirement or client-driven demand. In summary, the style of penetration testing as a security assessment is morphing, and mature CSPs are leading the change. A cloud auditor must go beyond a checkbox exercise of looking for evidence of a traditional annual penetration test by a CSP. Instead, the auditor should seek to identify and assess control elements embedded in the CSP software development and build pipeline, and qualitatively assess the decision-making and application of penetration testing in practice. 90 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 90. Bug bounty programs. Some organizations offer bug bounty programs in an effort to draw on a broad and diverse pool of external talent to test the security of their services. These programs may augment or in some cases replace existing software assurance/penetration testing teams. Successful bug bounty hunters receive rewards based on the severity and quality of their security bug reports. When done right, bug bounty programs can increase confidence in the target service and provide a good return on investment. On the other hand, a poorly executed bug bounty program may attract few true experts and result in a deluge of substandard bug reports that an internal security team has to work through. Red teaming. Red teams challenge organization security by simulating an active and dynamic threat that seeks to achieve a well-defined and agreed-to threat objective. This objective may be composed of high-level goals to take control of or steal something of value to the organization. The existence of secondary goals underpinning the primary goals may allow the red team to demonstrate control defects even if primary objectives are not achieved. Red team engagements may be hands-on or tabletop exercises. Unlike vulnerability testing and penetration tests, which are technology or vulnerability-centric, red team assessments are threat-centric. Red teams execute adversary simulation exercises to assess an organization's cyber defense, detection, and response capabilities. Exercise examples include breach of a credit card database, placing an unapproved trade that affects hedging, taking control of a utility provider, and stealing blueprints or other intellectual property. Full-spectrum engagements may include social engineering of staff and bypassing of physical access controls. Tabletop exercises are hands-off threat simulations led by an experienced facilitator or planner who identifies the relevant people, players, for each agreed-upon scenario simulation, which is subsequently played out around a table. The planner proceeds to inject hypothetical information to reflect unfolding events. Example: members of the press just learned about the cloud breach and have started asking uncomfortable questions. The players brainstorm responses in real time and attempt to manage the response possibly following existing response playbooks. The exercise continues with further injections and player reactions until the facilitator ends the role play and runs a feedback session with the group to stimulate learning and improvement. Follow-up tasks are assigned to implement learning lessons with the goal of becoming better prepared for the real event. Cloud providers may place constraints on hands-on red team engagements, since cloud services by nature share infrastructure across multiple customers and an attack against one tenant could impact a shared component. In support of a primary goal, a secondary goal of a red team engagement may be to gain control of the cloud tenant master account. The red team may use technical or social means to steal credentials. In practice, the red team may only be permitted to log into the cloud interface with the master account, take a screenshot as proof, but go no further. These limitations should be set in advance during the red team scoping activity. CSP terms of service may disallow clients from executing red team testing, or make the tests non-viable through heavy constraints. Many large CSPs have their own in-house red teams that continuously test the effectiveness of their cloud platform and people. Other CSPs use third-party red teams. In both cases, CSP clients may request copies of test reports, but given the sensitivity surrounding such activities, they may have to settle for very high-level summary statements. Purple team testing involves red and blue teams undertaking joint exercises to collaboratively test and improve key cyber controls in a threat-informed way. Red team mimics adversary techniques, tactics, and procedures, TTP, while blue team gathers valuable telemetry and observes the effectiveness of current or proposed defensive and detective controls/procedures. The primary benefit is that control defects, whether in protection, detection, or response, can be quickly identified and remediated. A popular source of TTPs is the MITRE ATT and CK framework. 2828 The MITRE ATT and CK matrix for enterprise applies to cloud-based TTPs. 2929 The MITRE Corporation. Getting started. https://attack.mitre.org/resources/getting-started 2929 The MITRE Corporation. Cloud Matrix. https://attack.mitre.org/matrices/enterprise/cloud 91 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 91. Security risk assessment. Unlike other assessments, a security risk assessment is not characterized by a technical hands-on test of security controls. However, it can inform and be informed by such activities. As noted in section January 4, 10 on risk management, a risk assessment seeks to identify the risk an organization may face through pursuing a particular course of action, for example, adopting a new SOS to support HR processes, assess each identified risk to increase understanding of the risk, for example, its source or driver, how the risk may manifest itself, the possible range, likelihood, and frequency of realizing the risk impacts, its interplay with other known risk, availability and suitability of control options to diminish or mitigate the risk, example the impact of a data breach or unavailability of the platform, respond to each assessed risk considering context of the organization's risk appetite, make recommendations to risk owners to accept a risk, develop compensating controls, transfer a risk or defer a risk, for example, the SOS platform may lack cloud data leakage controls, so the organization may decide to implement a cloud security proxy. The output of a security risk assessment is a risk rating and one or more recommendations, which should be framed in terms of the organization policies, known control defects, example independent controls, known plans and risk appetite. A recommendation can range from advice to proceed as planned, to proposals specifying one or more risk treatment actions to address identified risks. In some cases, the recommendation may be to defer or transfer risk, example through cyber insurance. Ultimately, the risk assessment is intended to inform the organization risk owner's decision-making by providing a coherent view of the risks, along with options on how to respond to them. Risk assessments sometimes prompt a re-evaluation of risk appetite by risk owners, or acceptance of risk. This can lead to a change of policy or creation of risk exceptions, which in turn may change the eventual risk rating and commentary. Management responses to risk assessments should be formally captured in the organization's risk management system. If it does not have a system, the assessor should provide an area for risk owners to respond directly on the risk assessment document itself. To ensure transparency and accountability, the assessor should recommend that the organization document any resulting policy changes, exceptions, and control-related commitments. Risk assessments vary in size and shape, according to the scope, materiality, complexity, and ambiguity of the activity being assessed, the risk assessment methodology, the range of risks to consider, the number of risk scenarios to explore and controls to consider, and the number of stakeholders and experts to consult. Scope and ambitious risk assessment may involve multiple organization technology platforms hosted at more than one CSP, crossing multiple business units in different time zones and crossing multiple physical borders. It is vital to recognize that the larger the assessment scope, the greater the risk to delivery. Materiality. A room booking system assessment likely has less materiality than that of an online banking platform. It follows that you should dedicate more time to assessments of greater materiality. The assessor needs to understand what is considered material to the client and its stakeholders. It is not unusual for a client to seek an assessor's opinion on where to focus, which ultimately is a judgment call. A helpful question to ask of an accountable risk owner is, what cloud risk keeps you awake at night? A helpful answer will refocus attention on what is ultimately considered material. The materiality can help drive the choice of assessment type, e.g., cloud platform security assessment, good coverage, average assurance, versus a penetration test, focused, expert-driven technology assessment, or red team engagement, adversary simulation for critical business functions. Complexity. Discussions in the planning process should focus on identifying and eliminating unnecessary scope complexity to balance the number of moving parts to be assessed with the goal and ultimate value of the exercise. Assessments may be broken into phases to make them more manageable, or segmented and assigned to 92 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide, copyright 2021, Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1, Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 92. Different assessment teams, e.g., a SOS HR domain expert has a narrow role in a broader organization cloud review. Ambiguity. Elements of ambiguity or uncertainty, such as a pending choice of CSP, must be highlighted and resolved. In some cases, the simple answer is to defer the assessment until there is greater clarity. In other cases, the assessment is required to inform a decision that will resolve the ambiguity, e.g., comparing the implementation of two competing cloud designs, or assessing the effectiveness of different CSP DDoS controls. A clear scoping statement addresses both the source of ambiguity and how it will be handled. Risk assessment methodology. The choice of methodology and target level of adherence naturally drive the depth of activity and the choice of assessment tools. It is important not to confuse a risk assessment methodology with either a risk assessment standard or assessment tool-specific methodologies, i.e., a professional penetration tester usually follows some sort of methodology to execute the test, but this methodology is distinct from the overall risk assessment methodology, of which the penetration test may be just one component. Range of risk. Large organizations with mature risk capabilities break out their risk management practices into principal or key risks, with separate teams per risk area. A cloud environment may be assessed for cyber risk, information risk, technology risk, privacy risk, compliance risk, sourcing risk, etc. There may be organization-specific risk policies, measures, metrics, and thresholds to review and use, and they may themselves need to be mapped to the risk assessment methodology. Some organization policies may mandate a risk assessment for large changes, which may require penetration tests for completion prior to going live. Number of risk scenarios. A risk assessment may seek to evaluate a range of cloud-related events that can lead to a business impact, example a cloud storage service outage, a CSP data breach, or a CSP going out of business. Scenario-based assessments lean more toward red team engagements, example a tabletop exercise with relevant personnel taking part in a simulated exercise to explore a given risk scenario. Controls under consideration. The number, location, and complexity of controls often directly inform the choice of assessment tool. A SaaS provider seeking a technical risk assessment of its platform may opt for an application security assessment and infrastructure penetration test. One of the SaaS provider's customers, however, would likely choose a cloud platform risk assessment to review its user-facing controls of the same SaaS. Taking this example further, the SaaS provider may host its platform on a third-party IaaS. A large prospective client may identify this subcontracting relationship during its own pre-boarding risk assessment, and as a condition of signing up to the service, may require the SaaS provider to undergo an independent cloud platform risk assessment of its use of the IaaS during the subsequent 12 months. Number of stakeholders. More stakeholders means more meetings. Effective stakeholder management requires a clear understanding of stakeholder needs, especially frequency and style of communications, and stakeholder expectations. It is easy for stakeholder engagement to pull time from assessment activity, which can reduce the effectiveness of the assessment. Cloud assessments in particular may involve multiple business partners, multiple CSPs, and multiple internal managers. Availability of experts. The cloud technology landscape is vast, and new types of cloud services are announced frequently. Cloud security experts are in high demand, but they cannot possibly have deep expertise across all services. Assessors need to be transparent about skill shortages to avoid missing key issues and giving a false sense of security. Third-party assessors may augment internal assessment staff, particularly to assess niche technologies, example Cloud HSM for key storage, or complex multi-cloud architectures. In addition, some organizations may place restrictions on the individuals who can perform risk assessments, e.g., the ministry of a nation-state may only permit country nationals. Also important is the availability of experts at the target organization who may be fielding requests from many customers. It is vital to identify which experts are needed, and to structure a risk assessment and secure the required resources. If relevant experts are not available, it may be necessary to weigh different potential outcomes or devise scenarios that assume certain conditions to be true. There is a wide variety of security assessment tools available for different needs and use cases. A key element of risk assessment planning is understanding which tool is appropriate for a given context. Simple Risk Assessments May 93 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 93. Only require the use of one tool, whereas others may employ multiple assessment tools across multiple phases with each phase informed by the results of the prior one. The Cloud Octagon model is a resource that can help organizations with assessing SaaS providers. 3030 limitations. Cloud services are built on the foundations of other services, so the shared responsibility model places limits on the kinds of assessments an organization can carry out. Most cloud providers do not permit penetration tests or vulnerability scans of shared infrastructure, but large CSPs publish assurance statements that describe their controls and how they are evaluated, and a security testing policy that often evolves over time, to allow more testing with less advanced notification. The policies usually allow more testing as they mature. The assessor will mostly rely on a cloud provider statements. If a provider offers a summary of the results of the assessments carried out by a third party, the assessor will want to know if the scope of those assessments is material and sufficient to the services that the auditee is consuming. The scope is critical, because it refers to attestations of security. Effectively, the auditor wants to establish the relevance, quality, and depth of any third-party security assessments, who performed the assessment, testers' skills, expertise, and credentials. How much time did they spend on the test? Were they operating under any test constraints? The assessor may engage with the cloud provider security team, and the nature and speed of the team's response to security questions could form part of the auditor's qualitative judgment. The auditor may also establish whether the person responsible for security at the auditee simply accepted evidence of security testing from the cloud provider or asked follow-up questions to establish more clarity around security controls. January 4, 15 Cloud Governance Tools. Auditing Overview. Audit reports generally have a higher level of formality and credence compared to internally produced assessment reports. First, establish the criteria for the planned audit activity. What is defined as success? Success as defined through audit reports can vary greatly by organization and by audit type. One organization may rate audits simply pass or fail, another organization may have ratings per individual finding, observation, or exception, plus an overall rating for the area under review. When a regulatory entity performs an audit, it may define success differently because the bar for a compliance audit may be higher than for an operational audit. See Chapter 5 for additional details on cloud auditing. Audit types. First party, internal. Audit. A first party audit is a self-directed audit in which the auditor and the auditee are part of the same entity. In some sectors, such as banking, internal audit may be a standalone function or department, separate from the risk function, with a separate reporting line from operational leadership. The head of audit may report directly to the CEO and, in many cases, the board of directors, or the audit committee of the board of directors. Internal audits are formal and in support of independence should follow the auditing principle of objectivity. Objectivity is facilitated for internal auditors in that they are prohibited from auditing an area where they previously had managerial responsibility for a designated time, often referred to a cooling-off period. The intent is for auditors to avoid being in a position to audit their own work. In practical terms, internal audits can carry significant weight, as reports are generally shared with 3030 Cloud Security Alliance, Cloud Octagon Model, June 24, 2019, https://cloudsecurityalliance.org/artifacts/cloud-octagon-model 94 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 94. The organization's regulators and external audit firms. Sharing of reports is part of the effort of internal and external auditors to collaborate and ultimately avoid duplication. External audit firms also share work with internal auditors. In such cases, the internal auditors will then work with the organization to monitor the external auditor's findings to resolution. Tip: due to the nature of cloud services, the organization loses a certain amount of control compared to an IT service delivered in-house. For this reason, it is of paramount importance to reinforce the role of the internal audit function, and to establish an auditor mindset and an accountability culture within the organization. See Chapter 5 for additional details on the role of internal audit. Second party, external, audit. In a second party audit, the auditor and the auditee are not part of the same entity. An external audit can be gauged by the level of independence and audit expertise that otherwise would not be available to the organization. For external audit firms that are subject to the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, PCAOB, there is guidance on audit partner rotation to facilitate independence of the firm relative to the organization. There are different requirements, or triggers, for an external audit, and the scope may vary widely. The organization may want to use the audit result for marketing purposes, to satisfy a contractual obligation for a customer, or to fulfill a regulatory requirement. Third-party, certification/attestation, audit. A third-party audit carries the most weight with external stakeholders and tends to have the highest level of acceptance given the level of formality, the robustness of the auditing methodology, and the strict competency requirements of the auditors. It is typically performed by accounting firms, example SOC2, CSA Star Attestation, BSIC 5, regulators, or specialist audit and security companies that are formally accredited by national accreditation bodies, or industry bodies that set and enforce standards, example ISO 27001, CSA Star Certification, PCI DSS. An attestation is a document prepared by a skilled independent practitioner, stating that the controls an organization has in place are effectively designed and implemented. On the other hand, a certification, which is issued by a certification body or industry body, states that technical and organizational control objectives or technical measures are effectively within the scope of the certification. How to audit the cloud. This section introduces and provides an overview of how to audit the cloud. Devise an audit plan. An audit plan is the set of activities that comprises the audit. The choice of how to audit an auditee plays a major role in determining how much time will be required in identifying dependencies. This is best decided up front, prior to agreeing on the audit timeline. The auditor will need to perform exploratory activities to identify which artifacts are available for review and what level of access to the target environment is practical, both physical/offline and logical/online, and gather availability and contact details of relevant subject matter experts. Sequencing of activities will depend primarily on completing dependency activities first, and by the timely availability of any target-provided artifacts and their subject matter experts, SMEs. 95 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide. Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 95. At a high level, the auditor is seeking to ascertain that the auditee is doing what they say they are doing, i.e., to ensure in-scope controls are in place and functioning as designed, not doing something that would materially impact what they are doing, and identifying material errors, conflicts of interest or omissions as they relate to the audit scope, and not beyond. For example, a client that claims to securely handle personally identifiable information, PII, may use a SaaS provider that employs encryption at rest for attachments uploaded to its service. In response to user complaints about limited upload quotas, the client's SaaS tenant administrator has installed a marketplace plugin that enables users to seamlessly store larger attachments but at a third-party provider that does not encrypt them. The auditor needs to recognize this situation and identify if the client is uploading large attachments containing sensitive data, because that likely would breach data protection regulations. The auditor should be able to answer the question, what am I auditing against, i.e., the standard or documented set of controls used as a basis for determining the truth of an auditee's compliance. Auditors should apply the relevancy test early in the audit process, as they develop an understanding of the audit environment, to better identify any controls that should not be audited, e.g., because they are irrelevant, or because the activity is in the planning phase and not yet formally defined and approved within the organization's control framework. Note, with formal audits, the auditor is not playing the role of advisor, providing professional consulting, or teaching the auditee how to check the box or cheat the audit. In addition to carrying significant reputational risk for the auditor and its employer, such behavior is contrary to the standard auditor code of ethics. It can lead to disciplinary action, such as loss of employment, and/or criminal prosecution leading to fines and jail time. It is acceptable to share common approaches that other organizations may take to meet an audit requirement, but auditors should never identify the source or share anything proprietary or confidential from other organizations. Auditing security requirements. The audit scope of security requirements goes beyond assessment of technical security controls. It encompasses examination of governance processes, risk management, cloud policies/standards, and third-party assessments. The design of a cloud governance framework should consider the scope of cloud activity across an organization. From an audit perspective, an organization's cloud workloads can be classified as falling within its governance framework, assuming it has one, or outside. An example of the latter could be an unapproved SaaS source code repository used by developers for hosting the company source code, just one example of shadow IT. A workload may be deemed out of governance because it is not formally identified and tracked within the auditee's governance framework, or because the organization has assessed it as non-compliant. It is important to make these distinctions when scoping an audit and expressing audit findings. Governance processes flow from and reflect the auditee's implementation of its chosen governance framework. The auditor first needs to evaluate whether the reasons the auditee adopted its chosen governance framework continue to exist, and check that its interpretation of the framework, in the context of the scope of a cloud audit, is rational and reasonable. The amount of audit effort involved in governance processes will depend on both the purpose and scope of the audit and the auditee's maturity. If the organization has only recently adopted the framework, it is unlikely there will be much to examine. The focus should then shift to evidence of proper planning, decision-making, and initial implementation. Since governance frameworks can be large, the auditee may have a governance implementation plan that reflects the steps it is taking to adopt the framework and achieve compliance in different parts of its business. Such plans seek to establish or improve the maturity of governance processes that ultimately bring the governance framework to life. 96 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide. Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 96. The auditor should review plans that pertain to governance of the organization's cloud activity to calibrate expectations, assess maturity, and refine the audit plan. Credible plans leave a trail of evidence that the auditor can review. Senior leadership will approve and track the plan, and there will be line items in official budgets and headcount plans to deliver the required support. In some cases, plans may be set as performance goals for responsible managers. Regardless of the scope of the audit, the auditor should become familiar with the auditee's governance processes, which provide the foundation for the organization's risk management practices, influence policies and standards, and set expectations for third-party assessments. This will not only help the auditor speak the language of the organization, but also navigate the life cycle of governed cloud workloads, and therefore is vital to the success of the audit. The cloud auditor will want to examine documentation supporting relevant governance processes for their underlying purposes, goals, inputs, execution steps, outputs, and measures. Once the governance processes related to cloud operations are understood, the auditor can assess the extent to which they are fit for purpose, reflect and align with the governance framework, are applied appropriately, improve over time in light of experience, and ultimately deliver security outcomes aligned with the organization risk appetite. Tip: the presence of good governance does not guarantee good security practices. However, it is rare to observe the latter without evidence of the former. With the governance practices understood, the auditor can turn to understanding and assessing the auditee's cloud risk management activities. The Enterprise Risk Management Framework, EMRF, provides a blueprint for how an organization identifies, measures and manages risk. It will typically outline the principal risk the organization faces, and describe the mechanisms in place to measure and manage those risks, including exceptions. The detail and number of supporting documents will depend on the level of regulation in the auditee's sector and its overall maturity in dealing with risk. To keep things focused, risks associated with the cloud will typically fall under cyber risk or technology risk, which themselves fall under operational risk. This is not a hard and fast rule, and the auditor should consult the auditee's ERMF as the definitive roadmap. The auditor should ask the auditee to highlight the relevant parts of the framework, bearing in mind the goals and scope of the audit, and walk the auditor through the core risk management process as it relates to cloud workloads. It is not uncommon for auditors to risk assess for the audit themselves. They may rely on the ERMF as a background or foundation but still tailor the risk assessment to fit the audit's objectives. The auditee should be able to substantiate its risk management practice with evidence. The auditor should assess across each core risk management activity. Risk identification core practices include concern reporting, which encourages and enables staff to report potential risks in a consistent and timely manner. Reported concerns are then evaluated by suitably competent persons for relevance, materiality, likelihood, and toxicity. Confirmed risks may be logged in a risk database and reported upstream to risk owners and risk committees, depending on materiality. Major risks may be recorded on an organization or function-wide risk register. For example, a help desk operator may report that customers are calling in to report that when they log into the company website they are seeing other customers' details. Risk measurement: the auditee may have defined qualitative and quantitative risk metrics and measures, which may be compared against management agreed upon values that reflect risk appetite and drive an overall risk status, e.g., operating within risk appetite, approaching risk appetite, exceeding risk appetite. Cloud-related risks may not be measured directly, but may fall within a broader category. In a conglomerate, risks will be aggregated across organizational layers, and a top-level risk committee may meet to determine whether any response is required. Minutes of these meetings will be recorded and will include packs, or decks, provided by relevant risk and control experts, which can provide valuable insight to the auditor. 97 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide, Copyright 2021, Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1, Cloud Governance. Image with the following description: image for page with label 97. Risk management: key tools for managing known cloud risks are policies and standards that describe what controls should be in place and, in some cases, how they should be implemented. Policy language varies from principles-based to prescriptive. The auditor should read and assess these policies and standards carefully, and seek evidence of how the auditee achieves compliance. Exceptions and non-compliances may signal how the risk processes work in real life. Discrepancies should be investigated carefully and followed up diligently, as they sometimes can reveal underlying behaviors or failures that are accidents waiting to happen. Supply chain or third-party risk is an example of an adjacent risk that is often relevant to cloud risk and will typically be in scope of a cloud audit. Key artifacts to examine are third-party risk assessments of CSPs. Some organizations will have policies that require on-site audits, which can present challenges when dealing with large CSPs. However, for smaller CSPs this requirement is more reasonable, and the auditor should look for evidence that a third-party audit was performed. Third-party audits are becoming increasingly standardized and follow a common pattern. In some cases, they are outsourced to generalist organizations that may lack cloud expertise. The auditor should assess the method, coverage, and completeness of prior assessments and evaluate the depth and breadth of coverage. An emerging best practice is the move toward a continuous auditing approach that reduces the dwell time between point-in-time checks and increases their frequency to provide a higher degree of ongoing assurance. Auditing legal and regulatory requirements: organizations are subject to legal and regulatory requirements, and an auditor must have a clear understanding of the jurisdictions in which the organization operates. CSPs typically do not make legally binding claims that their service is fit for use in a particular jurisdiction, even if they already operate in the same jurisdiction. Rather, a CSP confirms that it complies with local laws and any regulatory requirements in the jurisdictions in which it operates. The cloud customer is ultimately responsible for establishing whether its own activities, including its use of a particular CSP, comply with local laws and regulatory requirements in the jurisdictions and sectors where it operates. Given the potential fines and sanctions for failure to comply, it is vital that the auditor correctly identify the set of applicable laws, requirements, and compliance requirements to audit an organization against. An auditor who has limited experience auditing legal and regulatory requirements of the type and nature of the audit target should make it known during the audit scoping phase and arrange suitable expert support. This arrangement could be co-sourcing or outsourcing. Co-sourcing has the advantage of the auditor being able to develop professional expertise in auditing legal and regulatory requirements. At a minimum, the auditor should review draft findings with a relevant expert. Failure to do this can lead to professional liability, which may not be covered or may have limited coverage by any professional indemnity provider. Auditing SLAs/performance with the cloud. Organizations do not have direct access to the CSP physical infrastructure and cannot test it. However, they can use data provided through SLAs, third-party audits and compliance reports based on laws and regulations. When examining SLAs, an auditor ascertains whether the CSP's law enables the control owners to operate a service at the stated level. Often, the auditor looks for what is missing in this law, such as key operational matters that are material to the operation of the service. 98 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following challenges of first-party audits in the cloud and suitable alternatives. A customer that uses a public cloud no longer has direct control over several IT security and privacy-related features. CSPs typically prohibit security scanning, penetration testing and first-party audit by contract. If the CSP has audited itself but there is no external attestation, there is a high counterparty risk, which most organizations want to reduce. However, with experience and growth, CSPs generally start providing higher assurance statements, either in the form of an internal audit or one conducted by an external security company. If cloud customers need more assurance such as in regulated industries, or in the case of an organization requiring accreditation for contractual reasons, the CSP may engage a certified practitioner or firm to provide an attestation of compliance. Another suitable alternative is a community cloud, which is a shared infrastructure for organizations, example in the same sector or with similar needs. In a community cloud, an attestation of security benefits all users. See Chapter 5 for additional details about cloud auditing. 1.5 Chapter 1 Knowledge Check Review Questions 1. Which of the following elements are part of cloud policy? Select all that apply. A. Types of data that are allowed to migrate to cloud. B. Relevant stakeholders. C. Ability to perform service catalog. D. Mandatory controls. 2. When evaluating a cloud provider's maturity and ability to execute, the customer should consider, select all that apply. A. Fiscal performance. B. Board involvement. C. Transparency. D. Number of mergers and acquisitions. M&A. 3. For cloud trust and transparency, what are some key considerations that the cloud customer needs to be aware of? Choose 2. A. Inadequate transparency and auditability by CSPs. B. Lack of adequate cloud services and resource testing. C. Loss of governance based on distributed services. D. CSP service contracts address all client security risk in an IaaS deployment model. 4. Considering that cloud security is based on the shared responsibility model, select the controls that are usually the responsibility of the cloud consumer. A. Granting or removing application user access. B. External cloud backup. C. Security of the hosts and hypervisor layers. D. Producing security scanning reports. 99 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description. Image for page with label 99. Five in SaaS, which risk has a shared responsibility by both the cloud customer and cloud security provider. A. Infrastructure-related risk. B. Application-related risk. C. Data classification-related risk. D. Identity and access-related risk. 6. Which of the following parties should be included in a cloud service provider, CSP, compliance scope? Select all that apply. A. Subcontractors. B. Subcloud service providers. C. Employees. D. Cloud customers. 7. When reviewing proposed policies, what is the remit of a policy approval board? Select all that apply. A. Whether the implementation period is realistic. B. Consider the potential cost implications of implementing the policy. C. Determine the fit within the existing policy framework. D. Determine cloud technology strategy. 8. Which of the following are different types of hands-on security assessment? A. Vulnerability assessment. B. Cloud platform security assessment. C. Security risk assessment. D. Tabletop exercise. 9. What are standard audit types? Select all that apply. A. Internal. B. Self-assessment. C. External. D. Third-party. 100 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance 10. Match the requirement to the correct requirements scheme. Requirements scheme. A. Defines law requirements. 1. Security requirements. B. Understand the applicable law. 2. Operational requirements. C. Define controls framework. 3. Legal and regulatory requirements. Image with the following description. Image for page with label 100. (101) Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance Term Definition 1. Termination for cause. A. Used when circumstances have changed, and a party needs time to re-evaluate its options. 2. Termination for convenience. B. Used when circumstances have changed, and a party is able to stop without having to pay damages or penalty. 3. Suspension C used to identify a contract that continues for a longer duration than originally expected. 4. Cure period D used to identify a potential consequence of bad behavior on the part of one party. 5. Extension E used when a party who has, or is accused of having, violated the contract is given an opportunity to correct the bad act. 11. Match the terms and their definitions. Answers on page 102. Image with the following description, image for page with label 101. Chapter 1. Answer key. Correct answers appear in bold font. 1a. Part of cloud policy is defining controls which are mandatory. B. Mapping relevant stakeholder is part of cloud policy. C. Cloud policy is about security and resilience requirements. D. Part of cloud policy is defining controls which are mandatory. 2a. Market share, revenues, budgets, and other fiscal meters are all indicators for maturity and ability to execute. Unit 1.3.1. B. Senior management and board involvement in security strategy is an indication for how significant is security to the organization and an important sign for ability to execute. Unit 1.3.1. C. Organizations who deploy mature information security policies tend to be more transparent since they are confident in their decisions and able to clearly defend and explain their strategy. This is indication for is maturity. Unit 1.3.1. D. Mergers and acquisitions are not an important factor to consider when evaluating the provider maturity because while M&A could be important to acquire new capabilities or build new synergies, do not necessarily have a positive impact on the level of maturity of the service and of the CSP. 3a. As time has progressed, CSP tools and capabilities facilitating the auditability of both CSP and cloud customer environments have become significantly more effective. B. Similarly to question 1, CSP capabilities in this area have become more numerous and can more effectively benchmark and visualize the testing of cloud-native tools, applications, and workloads. This answer is incorrect. C. Due to the abstracted and decoupled nature of many of the CSP services and resources, it is a key responsibility of the data owner to understand the jurisdictional implications of running services in different regions. General Data Protection Regulation or California Consumer Protection Act considerations would be an example of potentially imposing governance outside of their respective jurisdictions. Organizational and local data protection regulations must always be at the forefront of any cloud strategy. This answer is correct. D. This is not possible, due to how risks evolve within a cybersecurity context. In addition, within the shared responsibility model, the provider is only responsible for the areas laid out in the service contract. Furthermore, providers will naturally look to reduce their risk profile as much as they can in any contractual situation. The customer must be aware of this, consequently this answer is incorrect. 4a. Paragraph 1.5.4. Examples of controls that are usually in the responsibility of the cloud consumer, access controls. B. Paragraph 1.5.4. Examples of controls that are usually in the responsibility of the cloud consumer, external cloud backups. See paragraph 1.5.4. Examples of controls that are usually in the responsibility of the cloud provider, security of the hosts and hypervisor layers. D. Paragraph 1.5.5. A number of security services and capabilities, like for instance, security scanning, penetration testing and first-party audit are typically prohibited by contract. 102 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 102. (6a) Should be part of compliance efforts. B. Are part of compliance efforts, e.g. IaaS cloud provider used by a SaaS provider. C. Are part of compliance efforts. D. As per Unit 8, 1.3, cloud customers are not part of compliance efforts. 7a. The board will balance the demands of other policies and implementation periods with major upcoming business initiatives. B. The board will weigh up cost implications of a proposed policy and may demand/challenge cost estimates. C. The approval board will consider alignment with and duplicative/overlapping controls in existing/proposed policies, level of detail, tone, clarity, style, and terminology. D. This is not within the remit of a policy approval board. 8a. The assessor uses vulnerability scanning tools to probe systems and services to identify technical vulnerabilities. B. The assessor performs a hands-on assessment of the auditee's cloud services. C. This not a technical hands-on activity, although it can be informed by technical assessments. D. This exercise is conducted around a table, whether real or virtual, driven by a facilitator. Even if using tablets to facilitate the exercise, it is not hands-on in the technical practitioner sense. 9a. Correct, also known as a first-party audit. B. Incorrect, this is a type of assessment, not an audit type. C. Correct, also known as a second-party audit. D. Correct, may also be certification or an attestation audit. C. Incorrect, cloud customer only. D. Correct, section January 4th, 10. Based on cloud customer and provider shared responsibility risk matrix. B. Incorrect, cloud provider only. 5a. Incorrect, cloud provider only. 103 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance 10. Match the requirement to the correct requirements scheme. Requirements scheme. A. Defines law requirements. 2. Operational requirements. Service level agreement is part of the operational requirements. B. Understand the applicable law. 3. Legal and regulatory requirements. When setting legal requirements, part of the process is understanding and defining the applicable law. C. Define controls framework. 1. Security requirements. As part of the security requirements process, the customer defines a list of controls, either generic, usually a third-party controls checklist, i.e., CCM, or a custom list made by the customer. Image with the following description, image for page with label 103. Match the terms and their definitions. Term definition. 1. Termination for cause. D. Used to identify a potential consequence of bad behavior on the part of one party. 2. Termination for convenience. B. Used when circumstances have changed, and a party is able to stop without having to pay damages or penalty. 3. Suspension. A. Used when circumstances have changed, and a party needs time to re-evaluate its options. 4. Cure period. E. Used when a party who has, or is accused of having, violated the contract is given an opportunity to correct the bad act. 5. Extension. C. Used to identify a contract that continues for a longer duration than originally expected. 104 Certificate of Cloud Auditing Knowledge Study Guide Copyright 2021 Cloud Security Alliance and Ccak. All rights reserved. Chapter 1 Cloud Governance. Image with the following description, image for page with label 104.